I spent $3,800 on the perfect Christmas party for my family. Every decoration, every dish, every sparkling light, I paid for all of it. I did it so my 8-year-old daughter could finally feel like she belonged. Then my mother walked over to the dessert table, looked down at my little girl reaching for a cookie, and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "You can't eat any of this food. It's only for my real grandchildren." She handed plates piled with cake to my sister's kids, right in front of my daughter, right in front of me. The room kept laughing and chatting like nothing happened, like my child's heart didn't just shatter, like this was normal. But something inside me snapped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up in the middle of that crowded room and said one sentence that made everything go dead silent. What came next? They never saw it coming. Because what my family didn't know, what they were about to discover in the most devastating way, was that I wasn't the failure they'd spent my entire life telling me I was. I had secrets. I had power. And I was done being silent. What happened in the next 48 hours destroyed my mother and sister's lives completely. The video went viral. A hidden inheritance was exposed. Even my sister's husband turned against her. But that was just the beginning. Stay until the end, because what I did to get the ultimate revenge, you won't believe it until you hear it. And trust me, they deserved every single second. This is my story. My name is Amber Lane. I'm 42 years old, and I own 2 businesses, a tech consulting firm and a property management company. But to my family, I've always been invisible, the daughter who never measured up, the sister who existed only to serve. Let me take you back to that Christmas party, the one that cost me $3,800 and changed everything. I'd been planning it for weeks. Not because I wanted to, but because my sister Emily called me in late November with that familiar tone in her voice, the one that sounded like a suggestion, but was really a command. "You should host Christmas this year, Amber. You can afford it, right? You work a little." The dismissiveness in those words, the assumption that whatever I did for a living was barely worth mentioning, should have been my first warning. But I said yes anyway, because I'd spent 40 years saying yes to people who never once said thank you. I rented the banquet room at Riverside Manor, one of the nicest venues in our small Connecticut town. I hired caterers who created a spread that belonged in a magazine: honey-glazed ham, herb-roasted turkey. 3 types of potatoes, fresh-baked rolls, and a dessert table that looked like something from a bakery window. I ordered custom floral arrangements for every table. I hired someone to string thousands of tiny white lights across the ceiling so the whole room sparkled like we were dining under stars. Every detail was perfect because I wanted my 8-year-old daughter Lily to have what I never had. Beautiful family memories, the feeling of belonging somewhere to someone. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was creating magic for a family that had never once made me feel magical. When Lily and I arrived that evening, I held her small hand a little too tightly. She was wearing the red velvet dress I'd bought her specially for tonight, her dark hair pulled back with a sparkly clip. She looked up at me with those hopeful brown eyes and said, "Do you think Grandma will like my dress?" My heart broke a little because I knew the answer, but I smiled and said, "You look beautiful, sweetheart." The moment we walked through those doors into that glittering room I'd created, I felt that familiar weight settling onto my shoulders. My mother stood near the entrance in her best dress, greeting arriving relatives with warm hugs and that bright smile she reserved for everyone except me. When she saw us, the smile flickered for just a second before settling into something polite and distant. She gave me a brief nod, the kind you'd give the catering staff, and turned her attention immediately to the couple behind us. "Oh, Margaret, Tom, so wonderful to see you. Doesn't everything look lovely?" She swept her arm around the room as if she'd arranged it all herself. Emily arrived moments later with her husband Marcus and their 2 children, ages 6 and 9. My mother's face transformed into pure joy. "There are my babies." she cried, dropping to her knees to embrace Emily's kids, covering them with kisses, telling them how much she'd missed them, how big they'd gotten, how absolutely perfect they were. Emily soaked it in, shooting me a small, satisfied smile over our mother's head. That smile said what it had always said: "I'm the favorite, and you never will be." I'd seen this performance my entire life. I'd grown up watching my mother celebrate Emily's mediocrity while dismissing my achievements. I'd cooked dinners for our family starting at age 13, while Emily was praised for remembering to make her bed. I'd earned scholarships that went unmentioned while Emily's participation trophies got displayed on the mantel. I told myself I was over it, that I'd made my peace with being the invisible daughter. I told myself I was only here for Lily. But watching my mother ignore Lily, sweet, innocent Lily, who'd done nothing wrong except be my daughter, the old wounds felt fresh again. The party progressed exactly as I'd feared. Relatives complimented the food, the decorations, the ambiance. Several people asked who'd organized everything, and my mother smoothly took credit with vague phrases like, "Well, we all pitched in," and "family effort, you know." I watched Emily let our mother lie, watched her accept compliments for a party she hadn't lifted a finger to create. I stayed quiet. I'd always stayed quiet. Lily tried so hard to be noticed. She approached her grandmother 3 times, each time being gently, but firmly redirected, as my mother engaged with other relatives. She showed Emily her new shoes. Emily glanced down, said "nice," and turned back to her conversation. I watched my daughter's shoulders slump a little more with each rejection, watched her start to retreat into herself the way I'd learned to do at her age. Then came the moment that destroyed the last thread of tolerance I'd been clinging to. Lily drifted over to the dessert table, drawn by the beautiful display of Christmas cookies, chocolate cake, pumpkin pie, and fancy pastries I'd special ordered from the bakery across town. Her small hand reached toward a sugar cookie decorated like a snowman. She was just a child reaching for a cookie at a party in a room full of food. My mother appeared out of nowhere, moving faster than I'd seen her move in years. She bent down to Lily's eye level, and in a voice that cut through the nearby conversations like a knife, she said, "You're not allowed to eat anything here. This food is for my real grandchildren." The words hung in the air. Several conversations stopped mid-sentence. I saw heads turn, eyes widen. My mother straightened up, called Emily's children over, and made a deliberate show of loading plates with cookies, cake, and treats, handing them to both kids with a warm smile. "Here you go, my darlings. Eat as much as you want." Lily stood frozen, her hand still half extended toward the cookie she'd never touched. Her face crumpled in confusion. "I'm not your grandchild," she asked in a tiny voice that shattered something fundamental inside my chest. No one answered her. No one came to her defense. A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone coughed. Someone else laughed nervously and changed the subject. The room moved on as if a child's heart hadn't just been broken in front of everyone. But I couldn't move on. Not this time. And in that moment, something inside Amber cracked wide open. Standing in that glittering banquet hall, watching my daughter's confusion and pain, I wasn't just seeing this moment. I was seeing every moment that had led here. Every wound that had shaped me into someone who would accept this treatment, every lesson I'd learned about my place in this family. This wasn't new. This was the story of my entire life. I was 7 the first time I understood I was different from Emily. I'd won the county spelling bee, beating out kids 2 grades older than me. I came home with the trophy, practically vibrating with pride and excitement, and found my mother in the kitchen making dinner. "Mom, look, I won," I'd said, holding up the small golden trophy like it was the most precious thing in the world. She glanced over her shoulder, said, "That's nice, dear. Now go wash your hands for dinner," and went back to stirring the pot. The trophy sat on my dresser for years because there was no room for it anywhere else in the house. When Emily brought home a participation ribbon from a swim class she'd attended twice before quitting, my parents took us all out for ice cream to celebrate her athletic achievement. That became the pattern. When I made the honor roll every single semester, it was expected, unremarkable, barely worth mentioning. When Emily scraped together a B+ in math, the only B in a report card full of C's, my parents took her to her favorite restaurant and told everyone at church how proud they were of her improvement. I learned not to show my report cards at all. I'd forge my mother's signature and turn them back in, keeping my straight A's to myself, because sharing them only made me feel worse. The forgotten birthdays hurt the most. I turned 11 on a Tuesday in March. I woke up expecting maybe a card, maybe pancakes, maybe just someone saying the words "Happy Birthday." Instead, my mother announced that Emily had made the JV cheerleading squad as an 8th grader, which was apparently a big deal, and we were taking her shopping for new shoes and going to lunch to celebrate. My birthday wasn't mentioned once. I spent that afternoon sitting in a food court watching my family celebrate my sister while I ate French fries and tried not to cry. When I brought it up that night, gently, carefully trying not to sound ungrateful, my mother looked genuinely confused for a moment before saying, "Oh, honey, we'll do something for you this weekend." We never did. I learned to be invisible. It was easier that way. By the time I was 13, I'd taken over most of the household management without anyone actually asking me to do it. I started cooking dinner after school because if I didn't, we'd eat at 9 o'clock at night or not at all. My mother worked part-time at a doctor's office and always came home tired, and my father was a regional sales manager who traveled constantly. Emily was busy with her social life friends, boys' drama. So I'd come home, do my homework quickly, and start dinner. Spaghetti, chicken tacos, whatever I could figure out from the ingredients we had. No one ever thanked me. The food would just appear on the table and everyone would eat it like it had materialized by magic. I did the laundry too. I cleaned the bathrooms. I helped Emily with her homework even though she was older than me, patiently explaining concepts she should have learned years ago while she complained about how boring it was. I became the family infrastructure, the invisible support system that kept everything running while receiving none of the credit. The worst part was that even my labor wasn't enough to earn respect. When things went well, it was expected. When things went wrong, it was my fault. I was 16 when I stayed up 3 nights straight working on my college application essay. It was for a prestigious scholarship competition, and I'd poured everything into it, my best writing, my hopes, my dreams of getting out. I left the final draft on the kitchen table while I took a quick shower. When I came back, Emily had spilled an entire glass of grape juice across it. The purple stain had soaked through 5 pages, rendering them completely illegible. She looked at me with this strange mixture of guilt and satisfaction and said, "Oops, you shouldn't have left it there." I'd expected my parents to be angry at her, to defend me, to acknowledge that this was deliberate sabotage. Instead, my mother sighed and said, "Amber, you know better than to leave important things lying around. Emily didn't mean to do it. Don't make such a big deal out of everything." I had to retype the entire essay from memory that night, bleary-eyed and heartbroken, knowing that my family would always choose to protect Emily and blame me. That was the same year I won first place at the regional science fair for a project on water filtration systems. It was a big competition with schools from 4 counties. The awards ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon, and I'd reminded my parents about it 3 times. I stood on that stage accepting my award, scanning the audience for my family. They weren't there. I found out later they'd taken Emily to look at prom dresses instead. My mother said she'd lost track of time. The trophy stayed in my school locker because bringing it home felt pointless. By 18, I understood with brutal clarity what I was to my family. I wasn't a daughter or a sister in the way those words are supposed to mean something. I was a resource to be used as scapegoat when things went wrong, and a shadow that made Emily look brighter by comparison. I was the child who existed so that my parents could point to her and say, "At least we have Emily." The day I graduated high school with honors, with scholarships, with actual hope for the first place, I also made the decision to leave. Not dramatically, not with speeches or confrontations. I just quietly moved 3 hours away for college and stopped coming home except for major holidays. I built a life they knew nothing about because I'd finally realized they'd never actually wanted to know. They never asked what I was studying, never visited my dorm, never showed the slightest curiosity about the person I was becoming. And honestly, it was a relief. Distance made their rejection easier to bear. I thought leaving would free me. I thought creating my own success, my own family, my own life would heal those wounds. But then Emily called about the Christmas party and I said yes. I said yes because I was still that little girl hoping that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. It never was. Yet despite everything, they still had the nerve to demand more. What my family didn't know, what they never bothered to ask about, was that I'd built something extraordinary from absolutely nothing. When I left for college at 18, I had $347 to my name, a partial scholarship, and a bone-deep determination never to depend on anyone again. That first year, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously just to survive. I waitressed breakfast shifts at a diner near campus from 5 to 9 in the morning, my feet aching in cheap shoes while I smiled at customers and poured endless coffee. Then I'd rush to class often, still smelling like bacon grease, and try to focus on lectures while my exhausted brain struggled to process information. Afternoons I spent doing data entry for a medical billing company, the kind of mind-numbing work where you type patient information into databases for $8 an hour. And at night, after most students were heading to parties or settling in to study, I taught myself coding. I'd stumbled into programming almost by accident. My dorm roommate freshman year was a computer science major who'd left her laptop open with code on the screen. I'd looked at it, really looked at it, and something clicked. It was like reading a new language that somehow made perfect sense. I started with free online tutorials, staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning, learning Python, then JavaScript, then SQL. I survived on 4 hours of sleep a night and more ramen noodles than any human should consume. My tiny studio apartment, the one I moved into sophomore year when dorm life became too expensive, had a mattress on the floor, a desk from Goodwill, and nothing else. I didn't own a television. I couldn't afford to go out with classmates. Every single dollar I earned went into 3 buckets: tuition rent and my escape fund. By my junior year, I was good enough at coding to start taking freelance work. Small projects at first, building basic websites for local businesses, fixing database errors, creating simple applications. I charged less than I should have because I was desperate to build a portfolio. But I delivered quality work on time every time, and word spread. One client recommended me to another, then another. By the time I graduated, I had a steady stream of freelance income and a reputation for being reliable, skilled, and affordable. That's when I took the biggest risk of my life. Instead of looking for a safe corporate job like everyone expected, I registered Lane Tech Solutions as an LLC. It was just me working from that same studio apartment, taking on any project I could find. I specialized in helping small and medium-sized businesses streamline their operations through custom software solutions and tech consulting. I understood something that bigger firms didn't. Small business owners didn't need fancy presentations and corporate jargon. They needed someone who could solve their actual problems without talking down to them. The work was brutal. I regularly pulled 16-hour days. I learned accounting, marketing, client management, and contract law, all while actually doing the technical work I was hired for. There were months I wasn't sure I'd make rent. There were nights I cried from exhaustion and fear that I'd made a terrible mistake. But I never told my family any of it. When my mother called occasionally, usually because she needed something, and asked vaguely how I was doing, I'd say fine, keeping busy, and change the subject. I let them believe I was barely scraping by because the truth was, I didn't want them anywhere near my dreams. I was terrified they'd mock my ambitions, or worse, that they'd somehow poison this one thing that was entirely mine. Then the business started to actually work. A mid-size manufacturing company hired me to overhaul their inventory management system. I did such a good job that they recommended me to 3 other companies. Within a year, I had more work than I could handle alone, so I hired my first employee. Then another. By year 3, Lane Tech Solutions had 12 employees and an office. By year 5, we'd made Connecticut's Emerging Businesses to Watch list. A local business magazine did a feature on me. I was invited to speak at a Women in Technology conference. My company was thriving. I bought a house. Not a mansion, but a real home with 3 bedrooms, a yard, and a mortgage I could afford. I bought a reliable car that didn't break down every 3 months. I opened investment accounts and college funds. For the first time in my life, I had security. Real, tangible, no one can take this from me security. I had money in the bank, retirement accounts, assets. I'd built the future my family never thought I deserved. And I told them exactly none of it. When I got pregnant with Lily at 33, her father was someone I dated briefly who made it clear he wanted no part of parenthood. My mother's response was predictably dismissive. "Well, I hope you can manage financially. Single motherhood is hard, you know." I let her believe I was struggling. When I showed up to rare family gatherings in my practical Honda instead of something flashy, when I dressed Lily in nice but understated clothes from Target instead of designer brands, when I lived modestly and quietly, they assumed I was barely getting by. And I let them assume it. It wasn't shame that kept me silent. It was strategy. I'd learned from 18 years in that house that my family didn't celebrate success, they exploited it. If they'd known I had money, they would have immediately started treating me like a personal ATM machine. Emily would have called with emergencies that required my financial intervention. My mother would have expected me to pay for things to help out, to give back to family. And even while taking my money, they would have found ways to diminish my achievements. They'd have said I was lucky, or that I must have had help from someone, or that tech money wasn't real money anyway. They'd never have seen me as successful, just as useful. More importantly, I was protecting Lily. Even before she was born, I knew I'd never let my family do to her what they'd done to me. If they knew about our financial stability, they'd use Lily as leverage. They'd guilt me through her saying things like, "Don't you want your daughter to know her grandmother?" or "Family is important for children." They'd weaponize my love for my child to maintain access to my resources. So I built a wall. I created a life they knew nothing about, a fortress of financial security they couldn't breach because they didn't even know it existed. I attended the obligatory family events maybe twice a year. I kept conversations superficial. I dodged questions about work with vague answers. I let them maintain their narrative that I was the struggling single mother, the daughter who never quite measured up, the sister who couldn't compete with Emily's supposed perfection. Their ignorance was my protection. But the more she succeeded, the greedier they became. Despite my careful boundaries and strategic silence, they still found ways to reach into my life and take. Emily called me 3 weeks before Christmas. I almost didn't answer. We rarely spoke outside of obligatory family events. But Lily was at a friend's house and I was between meetings, so I picked up. "Hey, Amber," she said in that breezy tone she used when she wanted something. "So, I've been thinking about Christmas this year. You should host the family party. You can afford it, right? You work a little." The casual dismissiveness in those words made my jaw tighten. You work a little. As if my 2 successful businesses, my 12 employees, and my years of brutal effort amounted to nothing more than a side hustle. But of course she didn't know the truth because I'd never told her. To Emily, I was still the struggling single mother barely keeping her head above water. "Emily, I don't think—" I started, but she rolled right over me. "Come on, someone needs to step up. Mom's getting older, she can't handle organizing everything anymore. And I've got the kids, and Marcus's job situation has been tight this year. You're the older sister. It's kind of your responsibility, don't you think?" The way she said responsibility carried decades of conditioning. In our family, my responsibility had always been to sacrifice, to serve, to make things easier for everyone else. Besides, she continued, her voice taking on a practiced lightness, it would be good for Lily to feel more connected to the family. Kids need that sense of belonging. That last line was the knife she knew how to twist. She was using my daughter as leverage, implying that if I didn't comply, I'd be the one keeping Lily from family connection. Never mind that the family had never once made Lily feel truly welcome. Never mind that my mother barely acknowledged her granddaughter's existence. Emily was framing this as if I'd be doing Lily a favor by funding a party where she'd inevitably be treated as lesser than. "I haven't even agreed yet," I said carefully. "Oh, I already told Aunt Margaret and Uncle Bill that you were handling it this year. They were so relieved. Everyone's really looking forward to it." Just like that, she'd trapped me. If I backed out now, I'd be the one disappointing everyone, the one breaking a promise I'd never actually made. It was Manipulation 101, and she executed it flawlessly because she'd learned from a master, our mother. I opened my mouth to argue, to push back, to say no for once in my life. But then I heard Lily's voice in my head from the week before. "Mom, why don't we ever see Grandma? Do I have a family besides us?" The longing in her 8-year-old voice had broken something in me. I'd been so focused on protecting her from the toxicity I'd experienced that maybe I'd also isolated her from the belonging children naturally crave, even when that belonging comes from imperfect people. "How much are we talking about?" I asked quietly, already knowing I'd lost this battle. "Oh, I don't know exactly. Maybe a couple thousand." "You figure it out. Just make it nice, you know. We haven't had a really good family Christmas in years." Before I could respond, she'd moved on to chatting about her kids' school activities, as if the matter was completely settled. When she finally hung up after 20 minutes of one-sided conversation, I sat there staring at my phone, feeling that old familiar weight settling back onto my shoulders. The next call came from my mother 2 days later. "Emily told me you're hosting Christmas," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "That's wonderful, dear. It's about time you contributed more to family events. You know Emily does so much for all of us, and she's got her hands full with those children, and I'm not getting any younger. It's really thoughtful of you to step up like this." I noticed she'd neatly reframed my sister's demand as my generous idea. "Mom, it's going to be expensive to do it properly." "Well, if you want us all to be happy together, you need to contribute. Family requires investment, Amber. Emily has children to support, a household to manage. She can't afford to do everything. Surely you can manage this one thing." The guilt-laden phrasing was classic. If I objected, I'd be the selfish one, the daughter who wouldn't make sacrifices for family harmony. The fact that I had a child to support too, that I was a single mother, while Emily had a husband with a steady income, somehow never entered the equation. "I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about expectations." I tried one more time. "Expectations." My mother's voice cooled. "It's a family party, Amber. I expect we'll all have a nice time together, unless you're planning to cause problems." There it was, the implied threat that any resistance on my part would be classified as me causing problems. Me being difficult, me being the troublemaker who couldn't just go along to get along. I thought about explaining that $3,800 was what it would actually cost to rent a proper venue, hire caterers, and create the kind of elegant event they were clearly expecting. But I knew what would happen. They'd either tell me I was exaggerating, or they'd say, "Well, do what you can afford," while still expecting the same lavish result, or they'd criticize whatever I produced as not being good enough. There was no winning scenario here. So instead I said, "It'll be nice, Mom. Don't worry." Over the next 3 weeks, I planned that party with meticulous care. I told myself I was doing it for Lily, to give her one perfect holiday memory with extended family. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, if I created something beautiful enough, if I proved myself generous and capable enough, they'd finally see me as valuable. I told myself I was choosing this, that I had agency in the decision. But the truth I wouldn't admit even to myself was that I was still that little girl desperately hoping for approval, still believing that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, tried hard enough, they'd love me the way I'd always needed them to. I wrote the checks. I coordinated with vendors. I approved menus and decorations. I handled every single detail while working full-time and raising Lily alone. When Emily called to ask about the party plans, she offered no help, just casual approval of my ideas, as if she were a client reviewing my work. My mother never once asked if I needed assistance or if the cost was manageable for me. They simply accepted my labor and my money as their due, as my function within the family structure. When the final invoice came to $3,847, I paid it without comment. Neither Emily nor my mother asked what it cost or offered to contribute a single dollar. The transaction was complete. I'd bought my way into another chance at being part of a family that had never once valued me for who I was. But the true betrayal didn't come until the night of the party. The party had been running smoothly for nearly an hour. Relatives mingled, complimented the decorations, filled their plates with food I'd paid for, while my mother accepted their praise with gracious nods. I'd been standing near the wall watching Lily try once again to engage with her cousins, Emily's children. They tolerated her presence but didn't include her, not really. Their body language made it clear she was peripheral, an obligation, rather than a playmate. Then Lily drifted toward the dessert table. I watched her approach it the way children do when they're drawn to something beautiful with wonder and anticipation. The table was legitimately stunning. I'd ordered custom Christmas cookies decorated with intricate icing chocolate layer cake with ganache, delicate cream puffs, pumpkin pie with real whipped cream, and gourmet brownies from the bakery that charged $5 each. Every dessert was arranged on silver platters with holiday garnishes. It looked like something from a magazine spread. Lily reached out her small hand toward a sugar cookie shaped like a snowman, her eyes bright with that innocent excitement that comes from being 8 years old at a party surrounded by treats. Her fingertips were inches from the cookie when my mother appeared. I saw it happen in real time, but somehow couldn't process it fast enough to stop it. My mother moved across the room faster than I'd seen her move in years, closing the distance to the dessert table with purpose. She bent down to Lily's eye level, really bent down, making deliberate eye contact, and in a voice that carried across the nearby conversations loud enough that at least a dozen people could hear clearly, she said, "You cannot eat anything at this party. The food is only for my real grandchildren." The emphasis she put on the word real was like a slap. It wasn't said kindly or gently. It was said with intention, with emphasis, with cruelty, that was meant to establish a hierarchy. My mother wanted Lily to understand exactly where she stood in the family order. She wanted everyone to hear it. Time seemed to slow down. I watched conversations falter mid-sentence. I saw Aunt Margaret's eyes go wide. I saw Uncle Bill look down at his shoes. I saw Cousin Jennifer exchange a glance with her husband, something uncomfortable passing between them. But no one said anything. No one moved. They all just stood there, witnesses to the casual destruction of a child's sense of belonging. My mother straightened up and called out in a warm, loving voice, "Sophie Mason, come here, my darlings." Emily's children scampered over immediately, already grinning because they knew what was coming. They always knew. My mother loaded 2 plates with cookies, cake, brownies, and candies, making a grand show of it. "Here you go, my sweet angels. Take as much as you want. Grandma wants you to enjoy everything." She handed each child a overflowing plate, kissed their foreheads, and beamed at them with pure adoration. The contrast was surgical in its precision. 2 children showered with treats and affection. 1 child told she had no right to even touch the food. All of this happening within 5 feet of each other in front of an audience. Lily stood frozen. Her hand was still extended toward the cookie. She'd never touched her arm, suspended in the air like she'd forgotten how to move it. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, hurt, and then this terrible dawning understanding that something was deeply wrong. She looked up at her grandmother with eyes that were already filling with tears, and in a voice so small and broken that it physically hurt to hear she asked, "I'm not your grandchild." That question landed in my chest like a bullet. This innocent child who had done absolutely nothing wrong, who had gotten dressed up in her best dress and come to this party with hope in her heart, was being taught in real time that she was less valuable than other children simply because the adults around her had decided it should be so. She was learning that love and belonging could be arbitrarily withheld based on criteria she could never control or change. She was experiencing the same rejection I'd felt my entire childhood, except she was only 8 years old. My mother didn't answer Lily's question. She just turned away, ushering Emily's children toward a table, cooing over them, completely dismissing my daughter as if she were furniture. I looked around desperately, irrationally, hoping someone would intervene, that one person would have the decency to comfort my child or correct this obscene cruelty. But no one moved. Some relatives looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, studying their drinks, suddenly fascinated by the decorations, but their discomfort didn't translate into action. They were all choosing the comfort of non-confrontation over protecting a child from emotional abuse. And then I saw Emily. She was standing near the beverage table and she was smirking. Actually smirking. She caught my eye for a brief second, and in that look was everything I needed to know. She'd known this would happen, maybe had even encouraged it, and she was enjoying it. She turned to her children and said loudly enough for Lily to hear, "Here, babies have some more cookies. Grandma wants you to have as many as you want because you're so special to her." That's when something inside me shattered and reformed into something else entirely. For 40 years, I'd absorbed this family's cruelty. I'd made excuses for it, rationalized it, told myself it wasn't that bad or that I was being too sensitive. I'd swallowed my hurt and my anger because keeping the peace seemed more important than defending myself. I'd been conditioned to believe that my role was to endure, to accept, to make myself smaller so others could feel bigger. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about my daughter, my innocent, precious daughter, who deserved so much better than this. Watching Lily stand there with tears streaming down her face, still not understanding what she'd done wrong to deserve such rejection, I realized something with absolute clarity. Every time I accepted their mistreatment, I was teaching Lily to accept it too. I was modeling for her that this was normal, that this was what family looked like, that her worth was negotiable based on other people's cruelty. I was teaching her to be me, and I couldn't let that happen. In that crystallizing moment, everything changed. The old Amber, the one who swallowed hurt and kept quiet, died right there next to that dessert table. What rose in her place was a mother who would burn down the entire world before letting anyone hurt her child again. And then Amber stood up. Calm, cold, and ready. I stood up from where I'd been sitting along the wall. I didn't rush. I didn't stumble. I simply rose to my feet with the kind of deliberate calm that comes when you've finally, irrevocably made a decision. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, observing this woman who looked like me, but was somehow entirely different, forged in the fire of watching her daughter's heart break. I didn't walk toward my mother or Emily. I didn't march over to comfort Lily, though every maternal instinct screamed at me to scoop her up and run. Instead, I just stood there in the middle of that glittering room I'd paid for, absolutely still, absolutely silent, and I looked at my mother with an expression I'd never allowed myself to wear before. No pleading, no hurt, no attempt to smooth things over. Just a flat, steady gaze that said everything without words. The silence that emanated from me was different than any quiet I'd ever carried. For 40 years, my silence had been submission acceptance, the muzzled compliance of someone who'd learned that speaking up only made things worse. But this silence was something else entirely. This silence had weight. This silence had teeth. This silence demanded that every person in that room stop what they were doing and pay attention. I watched it spread like ripples in a pond. The conversation nearest to me faltered. First, Aunt Margaret stopped mid-sentence about her new car, her voice trailing off as she noticed me standing there. Then Uncle Bill followed her gaze and went quiet. The silence spread outward in waves. People turned to look, trying to understand what had changed in the atmosphere, why the energy in the room had suddenly shifted from festive to something they couldn't quite name, but definitely felt. My mother glanced up from where she was fussing over Emily's children and saw me standing there. Our eyes locked. For maybe the first time in my entire life, I didn't look away first. I didn't drop my gaze or soften my expression to make her more comfortable. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and let her see that something fundamental had changed. I watched confusion cross her face, then irritation. She was used to my silence meaning capitulation. She didn't understand yet that this silence meant war. Emily noticed next. She'd been basking in the moment of Lily's humiliation, and now she saw me standing in the middle of the room with every eye slowly turning toward me. I saw the flash of alarm in her expression, quickly masked by defensive mockery. "Oh, here we go," she said loudly, forcing a laugh that came out brittle and artificial. "Drama queen strikes again. Always so sensitive, aren't you, Amber? Can't just let people enjoy themselves without making everything about you." The laugh she attempted after this proclamation died in her throat because I didn't react. I didn't defend myself, didn't argue, didn't give her the response she was fishing for. I just kept standing there, kept maintaining that same level unbreaking eye contact with our mother. My silence in the face of Emily's mockery made her words hang in the air, exposed and ugly, where everyone could examine them, without my usual rush to smooth things over or apologize for existing. Emily tried again, her voice rising slightly with an edge of nervousness she couldn't quite hide. "What are you just going to stand there staring? That's super weird, Amber. You're making everyone uncomfortable." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She was the one who was uncomfortable. She was the one who suddenly didn't know what script we were following anymore. Around the room I could feel the growing unease. Several relatives shifted their weight, exchanged glances with each other, tried to figure out if they should intervene or stay quiet. These were people who'd spent years watching me be diminished, and had said nothing because my submission made their own positions easier. They'd benefited from my silence, from my acceptance of mistreatment, because it meant they never had to make uncomfortable choices about whose side to take. But now that silence had transformed into something that unsettled them deeply. My cousin Robert cleared his throat. His wife touched his arm, shaking her head slightly, warning him not to get involved. Aunt Margaret looked at Uncle Bill, a silent conversation passing between them. "Do we say something? Do we pretend this isn't happening? What's the protocol when the family scapegoat stops accepting the role?" But I wasn't looking at any of them anymore. My gaze had moved from my mother to Lily. My daughter was standing near the dessert table, still tears on her cheeks, her small hands clasped together in front of her chest. She was looking at me with an expression so complex it broke my heart all over again. There was fear there. Yes, but also something else. Something I'd never seen in her face before. Hope. Desperate, fragile, barely daring to exist hope that maybe, just maybe, her mother was finally going to do something about the way they treated us. She needed me to be brave. She needed to see that someone, just one person, thought she was worth defending. She needed to learn that love meant protection, not passive acceptance of cruelty. And in that moment, looking at my 8-year-old daughter's tear-stained face, I understood with perfect clarity that every choice I made right now would teach her what she should accept in her own life. If I backed down, if I apologized, if I made this smaller to keep the peace, I'd be teaching her that her worth was negotiable, that people could hurt her and face no consequences, that being family gave people permission to be cruel. I couldn't do that to her. I wouldn't. The room had gone almost completely silent now. Even the few people who'd tried to restart conversations had given up, sensing that something significant was happening, even if they didn't understand what. The only sounds were the gentle holiday music playing from the speaker system I'd arranged, and the uncomfortable shuffling of feet on carpet. My mother straightened up, releasing Emily's children, and faced me fully. "Amber, what on earth is wrong with you? You're being very dramatic, and it's quite unnecessary. Stop this nonsense right now." Her voice carried that familiar tone of command, the expectation that I would immediately comply the way I always had, the way I was supposed to. But I didn't comply. I didn't move. I didn't apologize. I just kept standing there, and in my continued silence, I felt something shift in the room's power structure. For the first time in 4 decades, I wasn't the one who was afraid. They were. Then Amber opened her mouth, and everything shifted. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't waver. It cut through that suffocating silence like a knife through silk, clear and steady and absolutely certain. "I paid for this party," I said. The words landed in the quiet room with startling force. I paid the entire $3,800 for everything you see here tonight. Every single dollar. The venue rental at Riverside Manor. The catering, every piece of ham, every serving of potatoes, every dinner roll. The desserts you're eating, the flowers on these tables, the white lights strung across the ceiling, the rental chairs you're sitting on, all of it. I organized it, I coordinated it, I paid for it. This party exists because I made it happen. I watched the room absorb this information. Cousin Jennifer's wineglass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound sharp in the silence, but she didn't even look down at it. Aunt Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Bill's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. I heard several small gasps, saw multiple expressions of genuine shock ripple across faces that had spent the last hour enjoying hospitality they'd assumed came from someone else. The number mattered. $3,800 wasn't vague or dismissible. It was concrete, substantial, impossible to wave away as, oh, just a little contribution. People started doing the mental math I could see playing across their faces. They looked at the elegant venue, the professionally catered food, the elaborate decorations, and recalculated everything they'd assumed about my financial situation. The image they'd held of me struggling single mother barely scraping by was shattering in real time. My mother's face flushed a deep mottled red that spread from her neck to her cheeks. "Nobody asked you to pay for anything," she sputtered, her voice rising with defensive anger. "You volunteered. Don't stand there and act like you were forced into this." I turned to look at her directly, and my voice remained perfectly level. "Emily called me 3 weeks ago. Her exact words were, 'You should pay for the whole family Christmas party this year. You can afford it, right? You work a little.' She told me it was my responsibility as the older sister. She told me someone needed to step up because you were getting too old to handle it and she couldn't afford it." I saw Emily's face go pale. "Then you called Mom 2 days later. You said, and I quote, 'If you want us all to be happy together, you need to contribute. Emily has children to support. She can't afford it.' You told me that family requires investment." Around the room I watched recognition dawn on several faces. Aunt Margaret was nodding slightly. She'd apparently heard some version of these conversations. Cousin Robert's wife leaned over and whispered something to him. I could see people reassessing, reconstructing events with this new information. Emily told Aunt Margaret, Uncle Bill, and at least 3 other people that I was handling Christmas this year before I'd even agreed, I continued. She locked me in by spreading the word, so if I backed out, I'd be the one disappointing everyone. The one breaking her promise. I looked at my sister. "Isn't that right, Emily?" Emily's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her earlier bravado had completely evaporated. She looked to our mother for support, but Mom was too busy trying to salvage her own position. "This is ridiculous," my mother snapped. "We're family. Family helps each other. You're trying to make us look bad over simple family dynamics." "Simple family dynamics," I repeated, and now there was steel in my voice. "Is that what you call telling my daughter she can't eat food I paid for?" I turned and pointed to Lily, who was still standing frozen near the dessert table, tears drying on her cheeks. "That little girl, my daughter, your granddaughter, was just told in front of a room full of people that she's not allowed to eat anything at this party because the food is only for your real grandchildren." Those were your exact words, Mom. Real grandchildren. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the anticipatory quiet of waiting for something to happen. This was the crushing silence of collective shame. I watched my mother's face cycle through expressions, anger, defensiveness, a flicker of something that might have been guilt before settling on injured indignation. "I didn't mean," she started. "You meant exactly what you said." I cut her off. "You looked my 8-year-old daughter in the eyes and told her she's not real enough, not worthy enough, not good enough to be considered your actual grandchild. Then you handed plates of treats to Emily's children right in front of her to make absolutely sure she understood her place in this family hierarchy." I swept my gaze across the room, making eye contact with every person who'd witnessed Lily's humiliation and said nothing. These people who contributed nothing, not a single penny to this celebration, just excluded and humiliated a child at a party funded entirely by that child's mother. I paid $800 to create a beautiful Christmas memory for my daughter. And what did she get? She got to learn that her grandmother doesn't consider her a real grandchild, that her family finds her unworthy, that love and belonging can be arbitrarily withheld based on cruelty disguised as tradition. Someone in the back of the room, I think it was Robert's wife, made a small sound of distress. Aunt Margaret was openly crying now, though whether from embarrassment or actual empathy, I couldn't tell. Uncle Bill looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Even some of the people who'd laughed nervously when my mother first rejected Lily now looked horrified, perhaps seeing the incident differently when all the context was laid bare. The juxtaposition was stark and undeniable. I'd given everything, asked for nothing, and in return they'd deliberately hurt my child. There was no way to spin it, no way to make it acceptable. The moral equation was too clear, too brutal, too obviously wrong. My mother opened her mouth again, but no words came out. Emily was staring at the floor. Neither of them could defend the indefensible, couldn't argue against facts that multiple people had witnessed. For the first time in my entire life, I'd forced them to face the truth about who they really were. Not the warm, loving family they pretended to be. Not the victims of my supposed sensitivity. Just people who'd built their sense of worth by crushing mine, and who'd been foolish enough to think they could do it to my daughter without consequences. But that was merely the opening move. Emily recovered first from the stunned silence, but her recovery was panicked and graceless. "Oh, please," she said, her voice pitched too high, too defensive. "You're really going to stand there showing off your money like that, making a big scene about how much you spent? How pathetic is that, Amber? We didn't need your charity anyway. Nobody forced you to throw this party." She tried to laugh, but it came out sharp and brittle, dying in her throat when she realized no one was joining her. "You always have to make yourself the martyr, don't you? Always have to be the victim." I watched her try to maintain that aggressive stance, but she couldn't hold eye contact with anyone in the room. Her gaze darted from face to face, looking for support, for someone to back her up, but people were looking away. Aunt Margaret had taken a step back from Emily, putting physical distance between them. Cousin Robert was shaking his head slightly, his expression troubled. Emily's own husband, Marcus, looked confused and uncomfortable, like he was seeing his wife through new eyes and didn't quite recognize what he was seeing. The whispers started then spreading through the room in urgent, hushed tones. I could hear fragments of conversations. Did Emily really call Amber and demand she pay for everything? I thought they all contributed. Did you hear what she said to that little girl? That's Amber's daughter, right? The one who's only 8. Why didn't Emily just tell us Amber was funding this? That's so manipulative, letting everyone think so. Emily heard them too. I watched her face flush deeper with each whispered question, watched panic replace her false bravado. "You're all being ridiculous," she said loudly, trying to regain control. "This is a family matter. Amber's just being overly sensitive like she always is. She's trying to turn you all against us over nothing." But the words rang hollow. Everyone had witnessed what happened to Lily. They'd heard my mother's deliberate cruelty, seen Emily smile while her niece was humiliated. Nothing didn't match what they'd observed with their own eyes. My mother stepped forward, then deploying the tactics that had worked on me for 40 years. Her face arranged itself into an expression of wounded dignity. "Amber, you're embarrassing yourself and this entire family," she said, her voice taking on that martyred tone I knew so well. "You always do this. You always make everything about you. You take one small misunderstanding and blow it completely out of proportion. You always cause problems at family events because you can't just let things go." I watched her performance with a strange detachment, seeing clearly for the first time how practiced this was. The subtle repositioning of herself as the reasonable one, the patient mother dealing with a difficult daughter. The way she framed my legitimate grievances as character flaws. the implication that I was the problem had always been the problem would always be the problem. "We've tolerated your attitude for years," she continued, warming to her theme, now encouraged by the sound of her own voice. "We've tried to include you, tried to make you feel welcome despite your constant negativity. And this is how you repay us, by making wild accusations in front of our entire family, by trying to make me look like some kind of villain because I made one comment that you've twisted into something it wasn't." But this time, something was different. This time, the audience had information they'd never had before. They'd seen her cruelty toward Lily firsthand. They knew I'd paid for everything. They'd watched her take credit for my generosity all evening. The context that usually allowed her to paint me as unreasonable was missing. And critically devastatingly, she still hadn't apologized to Lily. She hadn't taken back what she'd said. She hadn't tried to comfort the child she'd deliberately hurt. She was defending her right to have said it, justifying her cruelty, making excuses for behavior that any decent person would immediately recognize as wrong. That omission spoke louder than any of her words. I saw it register on Aunt Margaret's face first, that shift from uncertainty to horrified realization. She was a grandmother herself. She knew that if you accidentally hurt a child, you apologized. You made it right. You didn't spend 10 minutes talking about your own hurt feelings while that child's tears dried on her face. Uncle Bill was looking at my mother like he'd never quite seen her before. Even some of my mother's longtime friends looked disturbed. The whispers changed tone. "Has she always treated Amber like this?" someone asked quietly. "I remember at the reunion last year she barely acknowledged Amber was there. And that comment about Amber's degree being from a state school while Emily went to community college? Remember that? God, when Amber's father died and she came to the funeral, her mother wouldn't even let her sit in the family row." I was watching a narrative collapse in real time. For decades, my family had constructed and maintained a specific story. Amber was the difficult one, the overly sensitive one, the one who couldn't fit in despite their generous efforts to include her. They'd told this story so often with such confidence that everyone had simply accepted it as truth. After all, why would they lie? Why would a mother speak badly of her daughter if it wasn't deserved? But now the foundation of that story was revealed as fiction. The evidence contradicted every claim they'd made. I wasn't struggling, I was successful. I wasn't ungrateful, I'd spent nearly $4,000 on their celebration. I wasn't causing problems, I was responding to deliberate cruelty toward my child. Every piece of the narrative they'd built to justify their treatment of me was proving false, and the witnesses to this revelation were having to reconstruct years of interactions with this new information. Emily saw it happening, watched her social standing disintegrating by the second, and lashed out again. "Fine, you want to know the truth? The truth is, you've always been jealous of me. You've always resented that Mom and Dad loved me more. So now you have some money, and you think you can buy respect. You think you can humiliate us to make yourself feel better." Her voice was rising, becoming shrill with desperation. Marcus put a hand on her arm. "Emily, maybe we should—" he started, but she shook him off violently. "No, she doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to act like she's better than us just because she paid for a stupid party." Emily was spiraling now, saying the quiet parts loud, revealing truths that were supposed to stay hidden behind polite family facades. And that's when I understood something profound. They hadn't just devalued me. They'd needed to devalue me. Their entire sense of self-worth was built on the foundation of being better than me, more loved than me, more deserving than me. If I was successful, capable, generous, and right, then what did that make them? If I wasn't the problem, then who was? The false narrative wasn't just convenient for them, it was essential to their identity. And I was watching it crumble into dust. And Amber decided it was time the whole truth came out. I let their panic and defensiveness hang in the air for a moment before I delivered the next blow. My voice remained calm, almost conversational. The $3,800 I spent on this party tonight, I could have paid 10 times that amount without even thinking twice about it. The statement landed like a physical force. I watched the words register, watched comprehension dawn. Slowly watched faces transform with shock. I own 2 businesses. I continued into the absolute silence. Lane Tech Solutions, a technology consulting firm with 12 full-time employees and contracts with major corporations across 3 states. And Lane Property Management, which oversees investment properties in Connecticut and Massachusetts. Between them, they generate revenue that puts me in the top 5% of earners in this state. My personal assets are in the 7 figures. I own my home outright. I have investment accounts, retirement funds, and college savings for Lily that will put her through any university she chooses. Emily's mouth fell open, actually physically dropped, as if her jaw had come unhinged. I watched her face go from flushed red to chalk white in the span of seconds. Her hands, which had been gesticulating wildly moments before, froze mid-air. My mother's face was even more fascinating to observe. Shock hit first, her eyes widening, her posture going rigid. Then disbelief, as if her brain was refusing to process information that contradicted decades of assumptions. And finally, something darker and uglier crystallized in her expression, rage intermingled with bitter, corrosive envy. She'd built her entire sense of superiority on the foundation of having 1 successful daughter and 1 failure. I was supposed to be the failure. That was my role, my function in the family structure. The revelation that I'd not only succeeded, but vastly exceeded anything Emily had accomplished was destabilizing her entire worldview in real time. "That's impossible," Emily whispered, but there was no conviction in it. She was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You work in tech support or something. You said you did computer stuff." "I said I owned a tech consulting company," I corrected gently. "You heard computer stuff because that's what you needed to hear to maintain your sense of superiority. I've been featured in Connecticut Business Magazine. I was a speaker at the Women in Technology Leadership Conference last year. My company made the state's Emerging Businesses to Watch list 5 years ago and has been growing steadily ever since. I'm on track to retire at 55 if I choose to." Around the room, I could see people recalculating everything. Cousin Robert actually pulled out his phone, and I knew he was searching for my company. Aunt Margaret had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. Someone in the back was whispering urgently to their spouse. "You never told us," my mother said, and there was accusation in her tone, as if my privacy was a betrayal of her right to know everything about my life. "You never asked," I replied simply. "Not once in 14 years did you ask about my work beyond the most superficial pleasantries. You never asked what my company does, who my clients are, whether my business was growing. Emily, when's the last time you asked me anything about my life that wasn't either a request for me to do something for you, or a comparison to make yourself feel superior?" Emily opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. No answer came, because we both knew the truth. "You didn't want to know," I continued. "Knowing would have complicated the story you told yourselves about me. You needed me to be struggling, barely functional, someone you could pity while feeling generous about including me in family events. The truth is, you couldn't be bothered to see me as a full person worthy of genuine interest. I was more useful to you as a cautionary tale than as an actual sister." The willful blindness of it was almost more insulting than outright cruelty. At least cruelty acknowledged my existence enough to target it. But my family had simply decided who I was and never bothered to check whether their assumptions matched reality. For decades, they'd maintained this fiction about my life, while the truth was publicly available to anyone with enough curiosity to look. That's when the relatives started approaching. It was Aunt Margaret first moving toward me with a smile that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. "Amber dear, I had no idea you were doing so well. How wonderful. You know my son Jeremy is looking into tech careers. Perhaps you could give him some advice, maybe even an internship opportunity." The opportunism was so transparent, it was almost funny. This was the same woman who'd barely acknowledged my greeting when I arrived, who'd watched Lily be humiliated without saying a word. Now she wanted favors, wanted access to my success and connections. Uncle Bill was next suddenly animated and friendly. Always knew you had drive, Amber. Good to see it paying off. Say, I've got some money I'm looking to invest. Have you ever thought about expanding your property management business? I'd love to discuss partnership opportunities. They came like moths to a flame, relatives who'd ignored me for years suddenly eager to compliment my business acumen, to express admiration they'd never felt before, to position themselves for whatever benefits proximity to my wealth might offer. Every single one of them had watched what happened to Lily. Not one had defended her. But now they wanted meetings, advice, connections, opportunities. I watched my mother and Emily observe this shift in real time. They were seeing their social capital evaporate while mine materialized from nothing. These same relatives who'd always sided with them, who'd accepted their narrative about me without question, were now literally turning their backs on them to seek my favor. Emily looked physically ill. Her face had gone from white to slightly green. She was watching her little sister, the one she'd spent 40 years dismissing, mocking, treating as lesser being, courted by family members who'd previously followed Emily's lead. Everything she'd believed about our relative worth was revealed as fiction, and worse, revealed publicly, undeniably. My mother's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping in her cheeks. She'd lost control of the narrative, lost control of the family dynamics, lost her primary tool of manipulation. For decades, she'd wielded the threat of exclusion, the promise of approval, the granting or withholding of love as weapons to control me. But all of those tools only worked if I needed something from her. And now it was absolutely clear to everyone in the room that I didn't need her at all. I never had. The power structure that had sustained decades of abuse was inverting before their eyes. And then Amber revealed something that made their faces turn pale. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder I'd brought with me tonight. I'd hoped I wouldn't need it, that maybe some small part of me was wrong about how far their exploitation had gone. But I'd learned long ago to document everything when it came to my family. Trust, but verify. Actually, don't trust at all. There's something else everyone should know, I said, opening the folder. Over the years, I've noticed some irregularities in my credit reports. Applications I didn't make, accounts opened without my knowledge, references listed that I never authorized. I pulled out the first document, a loan application from 3 years ago. This is a personal loan application from First National Bank. The cosigner listed is me. My name, my social security number, my old address from when I was in college. Except I never co-signed this loan. I never even saw this application until I ordered my credit report last year and found it there. My mother's face shifted from indignation to something closer to alarm. That's ridiculous. You're making things up now. I have the documentation right here, I said calmly, holding up the paper. Complete with the signature that's supposedly mine, but doesn't actually match my signature. Anyone want to compare? I pulled out another document. Here's a credit card application using my information and my old address to establish residency requirements. And here, I produced another sheet, is a rental reference form listing me as a character witness and previous landlord for Emily, complete with a phone number that was never mine. The apartment complex called the number, thinking they were calling me to verify Emily's rental history. Someone answered, claiming to be me, and gave a glowing reference. I could see Emily's face cycling through expressions, confusion, recognition, then poorly concealed guilt. She knew exactly what I was talking about because she'd done it. And here, I continued, pulling out more papers, are 3 separate instances over the past 5 years where my name and information were used for various credit applications, benefit verifications, and financial documents that I never authorized, never saw, and never would have agreed to. The room was silent again, but this silence was different. This was the silence of people watching something deeply uncomfortable unfold, something that had crossed from family drama into actual legal territory. My mother made a dismissive gesture, waving her hand as if to brush away the papers I was holding. Oh, for heaven's sake, Amber. That's just family business. Everyone does that kind of thing. You help each other out with paperwork. It's not some big conspiracy. Her voice carried forced lightness, trying to make this sound normal, acceptable, just another misunderstanding I was blowing out of proportion. Emily jumped in, desperate to support the narrative. Right, exactly. It's not like we stole from you or anything. We just needed some references needed to establish some credit history. You're making a huge deal out of nothing, over some paperwork. God, you're so dramatic. I looked at them both, these women who'd spent my entire life making me doubt my own perception of reality, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. What you're describing is identity theft, I said evenly. Unauthorized use of someone's personal information for financial gain. It doesn't matter if it's family. It doesn't matter if you think it's minor. Using someone's identity without permission to obtain credit references or financial benefits is fraud. It's a crime. Crime? My mother's voice pitched higher. Now you're accusing us of crimes, your own family. I'm stating facts, I replied. These aren't opinions. These are legal definitions. When you use someone's social security number without permission to co-sign a loan, that's fraud. When you forge someone's signature on financial documents, that's fraud. When you impersonate someone to provide false references, that's fraud. I kept my voice level, professional, like I was explaining a business contract rather than accusing my family of criminal behavior. And here's what makes it more than just an ethical problem. If any of these accounts default, if any of these applications result in debt, I can be held legally liable. My credit can be damaged. I can be pursued by collection agencies for debts I never incurred. You didn't just violate my boundaries, you put my financial security at risk. Uncle Bill coughed uncomfortably. Several other relatives were staring at the floor, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. This had moved beyond uncomfortable family dynamics into territory that implicated real legal consequences, and no one wanted to be a witness to this. But we're family, my mother said, and now there was a pleading edge in her voice. Family helps each other. You don't press charges against family over things like this. Things like this, I repeated. You mean identity theft, fraud, criminal misuse of personal information. I let those words sit in the air for a moment. The fact that you can't even name what you did tells me how normalized this exploitation has become for you. You've spent so long treating me as a resource to be used that you genuinely don't understand why this is wrong. Emily's face had gone from green to almost gray. She knew her finances were precarious. She knew she couldn't afford scrutiny. Amber, come on, she said, and her voice was shaking now. Don't do this. You're going to ruin everything over some stupid forms. I'm not ruining anything, I said quietly. You already did that. I'm just refusing to be complicit anymore. I straightened the papers in my folder. As of Monday morning, I'm notifying all 3 credit bureaus to place fraud alerts on my accounts. I'm disputing every unauthorized use of my information. My attorney will be sending formal cease and desist letters to both of you, legally prohibiting any future use of my identity information or likeness for any purpose whatsoever. Your attorney? My mother's voice was barely a whisper now. Yes, my attorney. Who I can afford because of those businesses you never bothered to ask about. I closed the folder. If there are any debts incurred in my name, you'll need to pay them immediately and provide proof of payment. If you don't, I'll pursue legal action to clear my name and recoup any damages. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't me asking you to change. This is me telling you what's going to happen. My mother's face had gone completely white. She didn't have money to resolve these issues, I knew that. The loan she'd co-signed using my name had been for $15,000. Several of the credit cards Emily had opened had balances. These weren't small amounts that could be quickly paid off. Emily looked like she might actually be sick. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Marcus put a steadying hand on her elbow. Her precarious financial situation couldn't survive this kind of scrutiny. If I disputed those credit applications, if I forced her to prove she had authorization to use my information, her entire house of cards would collapse. For the first time in 4 decades, they were facing real consequences for their actions. Not social awkwardness, not hurt feelings, not family tension that could be smoothed over. Real legal financial consequences that could follow them for years. The fear in their eyes was palpable. They'd spent my entire life making me feel powerless, and now they were discovering what powerlessness actually felt like. But Amber's next move would hit them even harder. "There's one more thing," I said into their terrified silence. "Something I think everyone here should know about since we're being honest tonight." I paused, letting the weight of anticipation build. For the past 7 years, I've been providing significant financial support to this family. Quietly, anonymously. Support that neither Mom nor Emily seemed to realize was coming from me. Or perhaps they chose not to acknowledge it because that would mean admitting they needed help from the daughter they considered a failure. My mother's face shifted from white to an odd grayish color. Emily's eyes widened with something that looked like genuine panic. "Mom's supplemental health insurance premium." I began ticking items off on my fingers. $340 a month. I've been paying it for 6 years through a healthcare assistance program that made it look like she qualified for subsidies. Her diabetes medication copays another $100 to $150 a month paid directly to the pharmacy through an account she thought was connected to her insurance. Emily's car insurance, $180 monthly, paid through a discount program that was actually just me sending money to the insurance company. I watched comprehension dawn on Emily's face, watched her mentally calculate how long she'd been driving around, thinking she'd found some amazing deal, when really her despised sister had been footing the bill. "The child care subsidy," I continued. $600 a month for the past 3 years, routed through a fund that Emily believed was a state assistance program. Those occasional emergency payments that somehow always appeared right when you needed them, the $1,200 for the car repair last year, the $800 for the emergency dental work, the $2,000 when Emily's furnace broke in January, all of it came from me. It came from... Aunt Margaret gasped audibly. Uncle Bill was shaking his head in disbelief. I could see relatives doing mental math, calculating just how much money I'd poured into supporting people who'd spent decades treating me with contempt. All told, I've provided approximately $70,000 to $80,000 in financial support over the past 7 years, I said. I did it through third parties and anonymous channels specifically so you could maintain your dignity, so you could pretend you were managing on your own. And more importantly so, you wouldn't have the opportunity to demand more while still treating me like garbage. "That's not..." my mother started, but I cut her off. "It is true. I have records of every payment. Bank transfers, receipts, correspondence with the programs and services I used to funnel money to you. I documented everything because some part of me knew this day would eventually come." Emily found her voice then, and it came out as a near shriek. "You can't just stop. I need that money. What am I supposed to do about childcare? How am I supposed to keep my car insured?" "Do you want my kids to suffer? Is that what you want?" The desperation in her voice was raw and ugly. The mask of superiority had completely fallen away, replaced by the truth she'd hidden under years of mockery. She was barely holding on financially, and I was the only thing keeping her afloat. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. This was the sister who'd spent 40 years treating me as less than, who'd dismissed my accomplishments, who'd smiled while her mother humiliated my daughter. And she'd been surviving on my charity the entire time. My mother tried to salvage some dignity. "We don't need anything from you," she said, but her voice quavered badly. "We've been fine without you. We'll continue to be fine." "Mom," I said quietly, "you're on a fixed income that doesn't cover your medical expenses. Without my help, you'll be choosing between medications and food within 3 months. Emily, you're in the middle of a divorce, unemployed, and have been living beyond your means for years. You won't make it through summer without the support I've been providing." The truth of those statements hung in the air, undeniable. "As of tonight, all of that support ends," I said clearly. "Every payment, every subsidy, every anonymous assistance, it all stops. You'll receive formal notice from my attorney's office, but I'm telling you now so you can plan accordingly." "You can't do this," Emily said, and now she was crying. "You can't just abandon family when we need you. The word abandon almost made me laugh. Abandon you. The way you abandoned me at every school event, every achievement, every moment I needed support. The way you abandoned Lily tonight, watching her be humiliated and saying nothing. That kind of abandonment. We're your family, my mother said desperately. Blood is thicker than water. You have obligations. No, I interrupted, and my voice was steel. I don't. For 40 years, I've fulfilled obligations that were never reciprocal. I've given and given and given while receiving nothing but contempt in return. That ends tonight. I walked over to Lily, who was still standing near the dessert table, and took her small hand in mine. Her fingers gripped mine tightly, and I felt her trembling slightly. From this moment forward, I said, turning to address not just my mother and Emily, but the entire room. I'm prioritizing the family I've built, Lily, and our happiness, not the toxic people who spent decades telling me I wasn't enough. You had 40 years to treat me like I mattered. You chose not to. Every single day you chose cruelty over kindness. You chose exploitation over appreciation. You chose to diminish me because it made you feel bigger. Those choices have consequences. I started walking toward the exit, Lily's hand secure in mine. Behind me, I could hear my mother calling my name, Emily's desperate voice rising in protest. But I didn't turn around. I kept walking. And then something remarkable happened. As I moved through the crowd of relatives, people stepped aside, actually moved out of my path. It wasn't just physical space they were giving me, it was something else. Respect. Recognition. Several people met my eyes and gave small nods. Aunt Margaret touched my arm gently as I passed, a gesture of support she'd never offered before. I pushed open the door to the banquet hall and walked out into the cold December night with my daughter. Behind me, I could still hear voices raised in conflict, the sound of my mother and Emily's world collapsing in real time. The psychological foundation they'd built on my subservience was crumbling entirely, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. We'd made it to my car when Lily finally spoke. Mom, are we really never going back? I knelt down to her level the same way my mother had when she'd delivered her cruelty, but my intention was the opposite. No, baby, we're never going back. Is that okay with you? She threw her arms around my neck. Yes, she whispered. Yes, it's okay. And soon the whole town would know what they'd done. 3 days passed in relative quiet. Lily and I spent them cocooned in our home, decompressing from the emotional intensity of that Christmas party. We baked cookies together, watched movies, talked about what had happened in age-appropriate terms. She asked me questions, good questions about why people hurt each other, about whether we'd ever see Grandma again, about whether what happened was her fault. I answered each one honestly, carefully making sure she understood that cruelty was never the victim's fault. On the 3rd day, my phone started buzzing incessantly. Text messages, missed calls, notifications piling up faster than I could check them. I picked up the phone confused and saw a message from my college roommate Sarah, who still lived in town. Oh my God, Amber, have you seen this? The video is everywhere. My stomach dropped. What video? She sent me a link to a local Facebook community group. I clicked it, and there it was. The video had been filmed by Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman I vaguely remembered from the party, someone's friend, quiet and kind-faced. Apparently, she'd been recording the beautiful decorations and festive setup panning across the dessert table I'd spent so much money creating. The footage was innocent enough at first, twinkling lights, elegant platters of food, the murmur of pleasant conversation in the background. Then the camera caught Lily, my 8-year-old daughter, reaching for a cookie with pure childhood joy on her face. And then my mother swooping in, bending down, her voice cutting through the ambient noise with devastating clarity. You cannot eat anything here. This food is for my real grandchildren. The audio was crystal clear. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. You could hear the emphasis on real, hear the deliberate cruelty in her tone. The camera caught Lily's face as confusion and hurt flooded her features. It captured my mother straightening up and calling Emily's children over the theatrical way she loaded their plates with treats, while Lily stood frozen, her hand still extended toward the cookie she'd never touched. Mrs. Chen's voice came through on the recording, soft and horrified. "Oh my goodness, did she really just—" And then the video ended. The post had been shared 847 times. It had over 50,000 views. The comments section had exploded. According to Sarah's follow-up message, Mrs. Chen had initially only shown the video to a few close friends, saying she couldn't believe someone would treat a child like that. But those friends had shared it. And their friends had shared it. And within 72 hours, it had spread through every local Facebook group, community page, and social network in our small Connecticut town and beyond. Someone had added text overlay, "Local grandmother publicly discriminates against grandchild. At $3, $800, party she didn't even pay for." Another share had the caption, "Child humiliated at family Christmas, while mother who funded event watches the full story," in comments. I scrolled through the comments, my hands shaking. There were hundreds of them. "This is absolutely disgusting. That poor child. I know this family. The grandmother always acted so sweet at church. This is her true face. Somebody find out who the mother of that little girl is and give her a medal for not physically attacking that awful woman. The fact that Amber paid for everything and they still treated her daughter like this, I'm speechless." I worked with Emily years ago. She always talked about her sister like she was a loser. Turns out Emily's been living off her loser sister's money this whole time. The hypocrisy. This isn't just mean. This is psychological abuse of a child. Someone should report this family to CPS. But there were other comments too, ones that made my throat tight. People who'd witnessed other incidents over the years were coming forward sharing their own observations. I remember at the school fundraiser 5 years ago, the grandmother completely ignored Amber while gushing over Emily. I thought it was strange then. I saw them at a restaurant once. The mother literally moved seats so she wouldn't have to sit next to Amber. Emily laughed about it. Amber Lane is one of the kindest, most professional business owners in this state. I've contracted with her company. The fact that her own family treats her like this is heartbreaking. The video was providing public, undeniable proof that I hadn't been exaggerating, hadn't been too sensitive, hadn't been dramatic. My family really was this cruel. And now everyone could see it. Over the next few days, I heard through various sources what was happening to my mother and Emily. I didn't seek out this information. People brought it to me, thinking I'd want to know, perhaps thinking I'd find it satisfying. My mother had gone to the grocery store and been recognized immediately. According to Aunt Margaret, who called me in tears to apologize for her years of silence, people had turned away when Mom approached. Conversations stopped. Former friends suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. One woman had actually said loudly enough for others to hear, "I can't believe I ever thought well of you." At church that Sunday, my mother's usual pew, the one where she'd sat for 30 years surrounded by friends, was empty except for her. People had chosen to sit elsewhere. The pastor's wife, who'd been Mom's friend, moved to a different section. The message was clear and brutal: "You're not welcome here anymore." Emily was faring worse. Her neighbors who'd watched the video and recognized her standing in the background doing nothing had started avoiding her. One had confronted her in the driveway. "I watched you smile while that child was hurt. You're disgusting." The text message from Emily's former friend, "I can't believe you were part of that. That's child abuse," had been screenshotted and shared, adding another layer to the story. Emily's phone number appeared in some of the comment threads. People were calling her, leaving messages expressing their disgust. Some were threatening. Most were just disappointed, which might have been worse. Marcus, according to mutual acquaintances, had been horrified when he saw the video. He'd apparently had no idea the extent of his wife's cruelty. The divorce proceedings, which had been tentative, were now moving forward with iron determination. They'd both tried calling me dozens of times. I didn't answer. What could they possibly say that would matter? The video showed the truth. There was no explaining it away, no context that made it acceptable, no apology that could undo what they'd done. The social isolation they were experiencing was immediate and inescapable. For decades, I'd endured a quieter form of exclusion, the emotional kind where you're present but invisible, included but not valued. Now they were experiencing the public version where entire communities turned their backs at once. The shame I imagined was crushing. They couldn't go anywhere without being recognized, without seeing the judgment in people's eyes, without knowing that everyone had seen their worst moment playing on repeat. And there was no controlling it. No amount of damage control could unspread a viral video. No explanation could override what people had witnessed with their own eyes and heard with their own ears. The internet was forever, and so was their shame. And then someone unexpected came forward. 1 month after the Christmas party, I was beginning to find a new rhythm in life. Lily was thriving, actually thriving, without the anxiety of obligatory family visits hanging over us. The viral video had done its work in the community, and while I'd received countless messages of support, I'd largely stayed out of the public conversation. I'd said what needed to be said that night at the party. The rest was just watching consequences unfold. Then I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Amber, this is Helen, your great-aunt Helen." The voice was elderly but steady-colored with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I need to speak with you. In person, if possible. It's important." Aunt Helen. I'd seen her at family gatherings over the years, a quiet elderly woman who always sat in the corner, who never said much, who seemed to observe more than participate. She was my grandmother's sister, which made her my mother's aunt. I'd always sensed she was different from the rest of the family, gentler somehow, but we'd never had a real conversation. "Of course," I said. "When would you like to meet?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop the next day. When I arrived, I found her already seated at a corner table, a thick manila envelope resting in front of her. She looked older than I remembered, frailer, more translucent, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "I've been debating whether to contact you for years, but after seeing that video, after watching what they did to your little girl," her voice cracked. "I couldn't stay silent anymore. I'm 84 years old, Amber. I'm too old to keep carrying other people's secrets, especially when those secrets have caused so much harm." "What secrets?" I asked gently. Helen took a deep breath. "I want you to know first that I've watched what your mother and Emily have done to you since you were a child. I saw how they dismissed you, how they diminished every accomplishment, how they made you feel invisible in your own family. I wanted to intervene so many times. I wanted to speak up to tell you that you deserved better, that it wasn't your fault. But I was a coward." Tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. "I was afraid if I spoke up, they'd cut me off too. I'd lose access to the family. And I told myself it wasn't my place, that you seemed strong enough to handle it. But watching them do the same thing to Lily, that broke something in me. History was repeating itself, and I couldn't bear it anymore." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." She nodded, composing herself, and then pushed the envelope toward me. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear. Your grandmother, my sister Grace, passed away 10 years ago." "I know. I was at the funeral." "What you don't know is that Grace left a will, a very detailed, legally binding will that she had drawn up 2 years before her death." Helen opened the envelope and pulled out a thick document. "Grace was worried about you, Amber. She saw how your mother treated you. We talked about it many times. She wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of, that you'd have something that couldn't be taken from you." She slid the document across the table. I stared at the words, "Last Will and Testament of Grace Eleanor Morrison," at the top of the page. In her will, Grace specifically left you the family home on Oakwood Drive, the house where she'd lived for 40 years, and $50,000 in cash from her savings. She wanted you to have security, a foundation you could build on. She knew your mother wasn't going to help you. Helen's voice hardened. I was there when the will was read at the attorney's office. Your mother was there. Emily was there. I watched your mother's face when the attorney read the bequest to you. She went absolutely white with rage. My hands were shaking as I held the will. I could see my name clearly in the legal language. To my granddaughter, Amber Lane, I bequeath the property located at 47 Oakwood Drive and the sum of $50,000 from my personal savings account. But I never knew about this, I whispered. She never told me. Because she never intended to. Helen pulled out more documents, official-looking papers with legal stamps and signatures. After the will reading, your mother told the attorney that she'd contact you herself to discuss the inheritance. She said you were going through a difficult time, and she wanted to break the news gently. The attorney accepted that explanation. And then your mother went home and told everyone in the family that Grace had died without a will, that everything would be handled through intestate succession, which meant it all went to her as the only surviving child. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. She lied. She committed fraud, Helen corrected quietly. She hid the existence of a legal will. She sold Grace's house, your house, 6 months later for $270,000. She kept every penny. She never told you about the $50,000. She claimed there was no will, filed false documents with the probate court, and essentially stole your inheritance. I couldn't breathe. All those years ago, when I was struggling to build my business, working 3 jobs, eating ramen to save money, I'd had an inheritance. A house. $50,000. Resources that could have changed my life. And my mother had stolen it all. Why? I managed to ask. Why would she do that? Helen's expression was sad but knowing. Because if you'd had money, you might have had the resources to investigate, to ask questions, to hire a lawyer. She couldn't risk you discovering what she'd done. So she needed to keep you down, keep you struggling, keep you feeling worthless and incapable. Every time she dismissed your accomplishments, every time she made you feel like a failure, she was protecting herself from the possibility that you might someday have enough confidence or resources to challenge her. The realization crashed over me like a wave. My mother's cruelty hadn't been random. It had been strategic. She'd spent 10 years keeping me psychologically beaten down because she was terrified I'd discover her crime. The abuse wasn't just cruelty, I said slowly. It was a cover-up. Yes. Helen pulled out more papers from the envelope. I've kept copies of everything. The original will, correspondence between Grace and her attorney, photos of the house before your mother sold it, documentation of the sale, even some letters Grace wrote to me where she explicitly discussed her concerns about your mother and her intention to provide for you. I've carried this evidence for a decade, Amber. I should have given it to you years ago, but I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. I looked at the stack of documents, proof of theft, proof of fraud, proof that my mother had stolen from me, and then spent years psychologically destroying me to cover her tracks. And Amber knew exactly what to do next. I left the coffee shop with Helen's envelope clutched against my chest like a shield. By the time I got home, I'd already called my corporate attorney and asked for a referral to the best estate litigation lawyer in the state. She gave me a name, Richard Thornton, a partner at a Hartford firm who specialized in inheritance disputes and fraud cases. His office could see me the next morning. I walked into that sleek downtown office with my folder of documents and a clarity of purpose I'd never felt before. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice, actual legal documented justice. Richard Thornton was in his early 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every variation of family betrayal imaginable. He listened without interruption as I told him everything, then spent 45 minutes examining Helen's documentation with meticulous care. Finally, he looked up at me. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of inheritance fraud I've seen in 20 years of practice, he said bluntly. Your mother deliberately concealed the existence of a valid will, fraudulently claimed the estate under intestate succession, and converted assets that legally belonged to you. The documentation here is excellent original will, witness testimony correspondence proving testamentary intent, even proof of the property sale. But it's been 10 years, I said. Isn't there a statute of limitations? Normally, yes. Inheritance disputes typically have a statute of limitations of about 5 years. He leaned back in his chair. However, Connecticut law, like many states, recognizes what's called the discovery rule in cases involving fraud. The statute of limitations doesn't begin until the victim discovers the fraud. Since you only learned about this last month and your mother actively concealed the will's existence, the discovery rule applies. You have legal standing to pursue this. Relief and vindication washed over me in equal measure. What am I actually owed? He pulled out a calculator and a legal pad, making notes as he talked. The house sold for $270,000 10 years ago. Current market appreciation on similar properties in that neighborhood suggests it would be worth approximately $400,000 today. You're entitled to the original value plus statutory interest, which in Connecticut is 10% annually in fraud cases. That's roughly $140,000 in interest on the house alone. He continued calculating. The $50,000 in cash with the same interest calculation brings us to another $80,000. Add in the fair market value differential, the amount the property appreciated that you would have benefited from had you received it when you should have, and we're looking at approximately $180,000 to $200,000 in total restitution. The number staggered me. Not because I needed the money I'd built my own success, but because it represented the magnitude of what had been stolen from me. $200,000 that could have changed my life when I was struggling, that could have given me security when I had none. What are my options? I asked. We can file a civil lawsuit immediately, which would take 12 to 18 months to resolve and cost you substantial legal fees. Or we can start with a formal demand letter. He steepled his fingers. Given the strength of our evidence and the criminal implications of your mother's actions, I recommend the demand letter first. It gives her an opportunity to settle without litigation, which would be in her best interest, while making it crystal clear what she's facing if she refuses. What criminal implications? Concealing a will and fraudulently claiming an estate is a crime. It's theft by deception. Additionally, I'm quite certain your mother didn't declare the inheritance as income, which means tax fraud. We can inform her that if she doesn't make full restitution, we'll be reporting this to both local law enforcement and the IRS. He looked at me seriously. This isn't just about money, Ms. Lane. Your mother committed multiple crimes. She's facing potential criminal prosecution. The weight of that settled over me. My mother could go to jail for this. Send the demand letter, I said. It took 3 days for Richard to draft a document that was both legally precise and deliberately intimidating. The letter sent via certified mail with return receipt requested laid out every piece of evidence Helen had provided. It detailed the concealed will, the fraudulent probate claim, the unauthorized sale of property that belonged to me. It calculated the exact amount owed, $187,400 to be paid within 30 days. And then came the hammer. Failure to comply with this demand will result in immediate civil litigation seeking the above amount, plus additional damages, court costs, and attorney fees. Additionally, we will be compelled to report this matter to the Connecticut State's Attorney's Office for criminal investigation of inheritance fraud, and to the Internal Revenue Service regarding unreported income from the fraudulent appropriation of estate assets. Criminal penalties for such fraud can include significant fines and imprisonment. The letter was delivered on a Tuesday morning, according to the tracking my mother signed for it at 10:47 a.m. My phone rang 20 minutes later. It was Emily, and she was screaming. "What the hell have you done? Mom just called me hysterical. You're threatening to send her to jail over money from 10 years ago. Have you lost your mind?" "Did she tell you what she did?" I asked calmly. "She said there was some misunderstanding about Grandma's will." There was no misunderstanding. She hid the will. She stole my inheritance. She committed fraud, Emily. Multiple crimes, actually. I could hear Emily's breathing change on the other end of the line. Helen gave me the original will. I have documentation of everything Mom did. The lawyer says the case is airtight. Silence. Then, how much are you asking for? $187,400. That's what I'm owed the value of what was stolen plus 10 years of statutory interest. She doesn't have that kind of money. This is going to destroy her. She should have thought about that before she committed fraud. I said and hung up. Over the next 2 days, I heard from multiple sources about the implosion happening in my mother's house. Emily had apparently driven over there immediately after our phone call, and according to Aunt Margaret, who was now firmly on my side and feeding me information, the confrontation was explosive. Emily had screamed, "You stole from her! You actually stole her inheritance! Do you have any idea what you've done? She could send you to jail! We're all going to be dragged into this! How could you be so stupid?" My mother, cornered and terrified, had fired back. "I spent that money on this family. Your wedding cost $40,000. Where do you think that came from? When you couldn't afford daycare and I helped you out? That was Amber's money. You benefited from it just as much as I did." The alliance that had sustained their joint toxicity for decades was fracturing under pressure. Emily was furious that she might be implicated. My mother was defensive and desperate. They were no longer united against me. They were turning on each other, each trying to save herself, even if it meant sacrificing the other. I felt nothing watching this unfold. No satisfaction, no sadness. Just a cold certainty that justice was finally coming. But before they could respond to the legal demand, something else exploded. The legal demand letter wasn't the only explosion that week. While my mother and Emily were fracturing over the inheritance fraud, Emily's carefully constructed life was collapsing from another direction entirely. I received a phone call from Sarah, my college roommate, on a Friday afternoon. "Amber Marcus just contacted me, Emily's husband. He asked if I could give him your number. He wants to talk to you." She paused. "He sounded really upset. And he specifically said to tell you this wasn't about defending Emily. He wanted to apologize." I gave her permission to share my number, curious and cautious in equal measure. Marcus had always been peripheral to the family drama, a decent guy who worked long hours as a civil engineer and mostly stayed out of family conflicts. Emily had always portrayed him as being on her side by default, but I'd never actually had a real conversation with him. He called within 20 minutes. "Amber, this is Marcus Chen. I know this is probably the last call you expected, but I need to speak with you. In person, if you're willing. I need to understand what's really been happening in my wife's family, because I just saw something that made me sick to my stomach." We met at a coffee shop near his office the next morning. He looked terrible, exhausted, his usually neat appearance disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. He stood when I arrived, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I am so sorry." I sat down across from him. "What happened?" "A colleague at work showed me a video on Tuesday. He asked if it was my wife's family. I'd heard there was some issue at a Christmas party, but Emily told me it was you being overdramatic again, making a scene over nothing. She said you'd always been sensitive and jealous of her, that you'd embarrassed the family with accusations." Marcus's hands were shaking around his coffee cup. "So when my colleague showed me the video, I expected to see you causing a scene. Instead, I watched my mother-in-law tell a 7-year-old child, your daughter, my niece, that she couldn't eat because she wasn't a real grandchild. And I watched my wife stand there smiling while it happened." The pain in his voice was genuine. This wasn't a man trying to cover for his wife or make excuses. This was someone experiencing a fundamental rupture in how he understood the person he'd married. "I watched that video 3 times, he continued. Each time I felt sicker, because the look on Emily's face wasn't shock or discomfort. It was satisfaction. She was enjoying that child's humiliation, and I realized I don't actually know who I'm married to. Emily's always been good at showing different faces to different people, I said quietly. That's what I'm starting to understand. He looked at me directly. I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. How long has this been going on? What have they done to you? Because if what I saw in that video is representative of how your family treats you, then Emily has been lying to me about you for our entire marriage. So I told him, not with anger or dramatics, just the facts. Years of being invisible in my own family. The forgotten birthdays, the dismissed achievements, the burden of invisible labor. Emily's role in maintaining and benefiting from my mother's favoritism. The financial exploitation. The Christmas party I'd funded completely. The inheritance fraud I'd just discovered. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. Occasionally he'd shake his head or close his eyes like he was in pain. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. My children are watching all of this, he finally said. Sophie and Mason are learning how to treat people by observing their mother. They watched their grandmother humiliate Lily. They heard their mother talking about you with contempt. They're being taught that cruelty to family members is acceptable, that hurting people who can't defend themselves is funny. He looked at me with something like desperation. I can't let them grow up thinking that's normal. I won't. What are you going to do? I already consulted with a divorce attorney on Thursday, he said. I'm not making threats or ultimatums. I'm stating facts. I went home Tuesday night and asked Emily directly, is this who you are? Is this what you think is acceptable? And instead of being horrified by her own behavior, instead of showing any remorse, she got defensive. She said, I didn't understand the family dynamics, that you'd always been difficult, that I was overreacting to something taken out of context. There was no context that makes what happened okay, I said. That's exactly what I told her. I said the person in that video who could stand there and smile while a child was being psychologically abused, I don't know that person, and I don't want to be married to her. I gave her a chance to show real remorse, real understanding of what she'd done. She couldn't do it. She tried crying, she tried blaming you, she even accused me of betraying her by believing an outsider over my own wife. He laughed bitterly. She called you an outsider. You're her sister. I stopped being her sister a long time ago. I moved into the guest room that night. I've been documenting everything, Emily's behavior, her statements, her inability to acknowledge wrongdoing. Because if this marriage ends, I'm fighting for primary custody. I will not have my children raised solely by someone who thinks it's acceptable to hurt people for entertainment. The conviction in his voice was absolute. This wasn't a man wavering or conflicted. He'd made his decision and was moving forward with the kind of determined clarity that comes from finally seeing the truth clearly. Your children are lucky to have you, I said. I should have paid closer attention years ago. I should have questioned Emily's version of events instead of just accepting them. I'm sorry I didn't. You're here now. You're doing the right thing now. That matters. We talked for another 30 minutes. Marcus wanted to know if there was anything he could do to help with the legal situation regarding the inheritance. He offered to testify if needed about Emily's character and her treatment of me. He promised that regardless of how the divorce proceeded, he would never let his children be taught that what happened to me and Lily was acceptable. When we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't expected: hope. Not for myself, I'd already found my own path forward, but hope that Sophie and Mason might grow up different from their mother. That maybe one good parent was enough to break the cycle. Emily's world was crumbling from every direction now. The community had turned against her. Her mother was facing criminal charges. Her marriage was ending, and she was about to lose her children to a man who'd finally seen her for who she really was. While Emily's world crumbled, Lily found her voice. 2 months after the Christmas party, life had settled into something that felt almost peaceful. Lily seemed lighter somehow, no longer carrying the invisible weight of family gatherings she dreaded. She smiled more. She slept better. She stopped asking questions like, "Why doesn't Grandma like me?" because the answer had become irrelevant to our daily happiness. Then one evening in early February, she came home from school with an assignment that would change everything again. "Mom, I have to write an essay about my family hero," she said, pulling out a worksheet from her backpack. "Mrs. Patterson says it's supposed to be about someone who shows courage and character. Can I write about you?" My throat tightened. "Of course, sweetheart. But you know you can write about anyone." "I want to write about you," she said firmly. "About what you did at the Christmas party. About how you stood up for me." Over the next several evenings, I watched Lily work on that essay with an intensity I'd never seen in her before. She'd sit at the kitchen table, pencil gripped tightly, sometimes staring into space as she searched for the right words. Occasionally, she'd ask me questions. "When you stood up, were you scared? Did you know what you were going to say before you said it? Why did you wait so long to tell them they were being mean?" I answered honestly, age-appropriately. I helped her with spelling and grammar, but the words were entirely hers. I didn't see the full essay until the night before it was due, when she asked me to proofread it. Reading it broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. She'd written about the Christmas party from her perspective, the excitement of wearing her pretty dress, the hope that maybe this time Grandma would notice her, the confusion when she was told the food wasn't for her. "I didn't understand what I did wrong," she'd written. "I thought maybe I wasn't a real person." But then my mom stood up. She described how I'd confronted them, how I'd told the truth, even though my voice was shaking. And then she'd written the line that made me sob. "My mom taught me that love means protecting people, not hurting them. She showed me that being brave isn't about being loud. It's about standing up even when you're scared because someone needs you to. That's why she's my hero." When I finished reading, Lily was watching me with anxious eyes. "Is it okay? Did I do it right?" I pulled her into my arms. "It's perfect, baby. You did it exactly right." A week later, her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called me. "Ms. Lane, I hope this isn't overstepping, but I read Lily's essay and I was deeply moved. With your permission and Lily's, I'd like to read it at our monthly school assembly. It's such a powerful example of courage and standing up against injustice. I think it could really impact the other students." I discussed it with Lily, making sure she understood what it meant. "A lot of people will hear it. Some of them might know what happened. Is that okay with you?" She thought about it seriously, then nodded. "I want other kids to know that if someone is mean to them, it's not their fault, and that grown-ups should protect kids, not hurt them." The assembly was held on a Friday morning in the school gymnasium. Parents were invited, and the room was packed with hundreds of people, students sitting cross-legged on the floor, parents and teachers in chairs along the sides. Lily sat with her third-grade class, looking small and brave. Mrs. Patterson introduced the essay. Our next selection was written by Lily Lane, and it's about finding courage in difficult circumstances. Lily asked me to read it for her. And then she began. The gymnasium, which had been filled with the usual rustle and whisper of a large gathering, went absolutely silent. I watched from my seat in the parent section as Mrs. Patterson read Lily's words about confusion and hurt, about feeling like she wasn't a real person, about watching her mother stand up even though she was scared. Several teachers in the front row were openly crying. I saw parents exchanging glances. Some of them knew who we were, had seen the video, were now hearing the story from my daughter's own words. A few parents I recognized from community events nodded at me with expressions of respect and solidarity. When Mrs. Patterson reached the final line, "That's why she's my hero," her own voice wavered with emotion. The silence that followed lasted several heartbeats. Then the applause erupted. It wasn't polite assembly clapping. It was thunderous, sustained people rising to their feet. I watched Lily's face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Her teacher was clapping with tears on her cheeks. The principal, standing near the stage, had his hand over his heart. I was crying openly, not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride and relief. My daughter hadn't been broken by what happened. She'd found her voice. She'd transformed her pain into something powerful and true. After the assembly, I was surrounded by parents wanting to talk. A woman I didn't know approached first. I saw the video. I wanted you to know that what you did took incredible courage. You're teaching your daughter and all of our daughters that they don't have to accept mistreatment from anyone, family included. Another mother said, "My daughter came home last month asking why the grandma in the video was so mean to that little girl. We had a long conversation about how adults can be wrong and cruel, and how standing up against that is always right. You've taught more than just your daughter. You've given a lot of us a template for how to protect our children." A father whose kids were in Lily's class told me, "My son has been dealing with bullying from his cousin. We've been telling him to ignore it because that's family." After hearing Lily's essay, we realized we were teaching him the wrong lesson. Family doesn't give people permission to hurt you. Thank you for showing us that. They kept coming, parent after parent, sharing stories of toxic relatives they'd cut off, abusive family members they'd finally stood up to, children they were learning to protect more fiercely. Several had seen the viral video and wanted me to know the community stood with me. One grandmother said, "I have a daughter-in-law who treats my grandson the way your mother treated you. I've been too afraid to say anything. Not anymore." This moment crystallized something profound for me. I'd thought I was just protecting Lily, just establishing boundaries for our small family unit. But standing in that gymnasium, listening to these parents tell me how our story had impacted their families, I understood that what happened at the Christmas party had rippled far beyond us. I hadn't just modeled strength for my daughter. I'd given permission to an entire community to prioritize protecting children over maintaining toxic family peace. The validation was overwhelming and healing in ways I hadn't expected. For 40 years, I'd been told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too unwilling to just get along. Now hundreds of people were telling me I was right, that protecting my child was more important than protecting my family's reputation, that love without boundaries isn't actually love at all. But Mother and Emily weren't finished fighting dirty. 2 weeks after Lily's essay reading, I received a flurry of text messages from different people, all saying variations of the same thing. "Have you seen Emily's Facebook post?" I opened the social media app I rarely used and found it immediately. Emily had posted at 9:00 a.m. that morning, and it was already being shared and commented on extensively. The post was long, several paragraphs of carefully crafted narrative designed to reframe the entire situation. "I've stayed silent for weeks while my family has been attacked publicly and our privacy violated," it began. "But I can't stay quiet anymore while my elderly mother is being financially threatened and emotionally destroyed by a family member who abandoned us years ago only to return when it was convenient to flaunt wealth and deliberately humiliate the people who raised her." I read it with a strange detachment, recognizing every manipulation tactic. She painted me as the aggressor, claiming I'd cut off contact for years and refused to participate in family events, before suddenly appearing to show off my success. She characterized the Christmas party as a family gathering my sister insisted on hosting and then used as a platform to attack my mother in front of everyone over a simple misunderstanding with her daughter. The post continued, "My mother is 72 years old. She's being threatened with lawsuits and criminal charges over estate matters from a decade ago, matters that were handled appropriately at the time but are now being twisted into something sinister by someone who holds grudges. Instead of having compassion for an elderly woman who's scared and confused, my sister is using her financial resources to bully and intimidate." Emily's framing of the inheritance fraud as estate matters handled appropriately was breathtaking in its dishonesty. She made no mention of the hidden will, the theft, the decade of lies. As for what happened at Christmas, the post went on, "A brief moment has been taken completely out of context and turned into something it wasn't. My mother made an offhand comment that came out wrong. She immediately regretted it. But instead of accepting an apology and moving on like a normal family, would my sister chose to make a massive scene, threaten legal action, and ultimately posted or arranged to have posted a private family moment online to destroy my mother's reputation." She ended with, "I'm sharing this because I want people to know the truth. Some people will do anything for attention, even destroy their own family. I pray my sister finds peace and stops weaponizing her daughter and her money against people who only ever tried to love her." The post was masterful in its manipulation. To anyone who didn't know the real story, it would sound reasonable, a concerned daughter defending her elderly mother against an aggressive, wealthy bully. Emily had deployed classic Darvo tactics: deny the abuse, attack the victim, reverse victim and offender. But she'd made one critical miscalculation. The community already knew the truth. By the time I finished reading, the post had 347 comments. I started scrolling, and what I saw was swift, brutal community justice. "We all saw the video, Emily. Your mother deliberately told a child she wasn't a real grandchild. That wasn't an offhand comment that came out wrong. That was calculated cruelty. You stood there smiling while your niece was humiliated. I saw it with my own eyes. Don't try to rewrite history when there's video evidence. Your own husband is divorcing you over this. That should tell you something about who's really in the wrong here. I know Amber Lane professionally. She's one of the most ethical, kind people I've worked with. The idea that she's the bully in this situation is laughable." Someone had screenshot the original viral video and posted it in the comments. Here's the offhand comment for anyone who hasn't seen it. Judge for yourself if this is a misunderstanding. Another commenter wrote, "My daughter heard Lily's essay at school. That little girl described genuine trauma. You're calling that taken out of context, shame on you." The comments kept coming, hundreds of them, and they weren't from strangers. These were people from our community, neighbors, other parents, people who'd known our family for years. Several shared their own observations. "I saw Emily's mother treat Amber terribly at the library fundraiser 3 years ago. Amber donated $5,000 and her mother took full credit. This pattern isn't new. Emily told me years ago that her sister was barely getting by as a single mom. Now we find out Amber owns 2 businesses. The lies go deep. The fact that you're calling inheritance fraud estate matters handled appropriately tells us everything we need to know about your character." One particularly cutting comment came from someone who identified herself as a family therapist. "This post is a textbook example of Darvo deny attack reverse victim and offender. It's a common tactic used by abusers when they're held accountable. The community isn't falling for it." I watched the post in real time as it became not a defense of Emily's reputation, but a comprehensive documentation of her dishonesty. People were sharing screenshots linking to the original video posting about Lily's essay, creating a full public record of Emily's cruelty and lies. 24 hours later, the post disappeared. Emily had deleted it, probably on the advice of someone with more sense than she had. But it was too late. Screenshots had circulated everywhere. Local Facebook groups had archived it. People had saved the comment threads. The deletion actually made things worse. Now Emily looked not just wrong, but cowardly, willing to make accusations, but not willing to stand by them when challenged. Marcus called me 2 days after the post was deleted. "I told her not to do it," he said, exhaustion heavy in his voice. "I specifically warned her that trying to control the narrative on social media would backfire. She showed me a draft, and I said if she posted it, I'd consider it proof that she was incapable of taking responsibility for her actions. I'm sorry you're going through this," I said. "She posted it anyway. I saw it before she deleted it. I took screenshots." He paused. "I filed for divorce this morning. I'm requesting primary custody. I used the Facebook post and all the comments as part of my evidence package. Her lawyer's going to have a very hard time arguing that Emily has good judgment and character when there are hundreds of community members publicly documenting her dishonesty." Within a week, Marcus had moved Emily's belongings out of their house. She had nowhere to go but back to our mother's home. The woman who'd spent 40 years mocking me as a failure was now unemployed, divorcing, losing custody of her children, and moving back into her childhood bedroom. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. Emily had tried to destroy my reputation and ended up destroying her own instead. She'd tried to weaponize social media and had instead created a permanent record of her own toxicity. And that's when Mother made the biggest mistake of all. 3 months had passed since the Christmas party, and the walls were closing in on my mother from every direction. The legal demand for $187,400 sat unanswered with only days left on the deadline. Emily had moved back home after Marcus formally filed for divorce. The viral video had made them both pariahs in the community, and my mother, cornered and desperate, did what cornered desperate people do, she lashed out. My phone rang at 10:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. I was already in bed reading beside Lily, who was asleep next to me after a nightmare. I saw my mother's number on the screen and silenced it immediately. I had no interest in whatever manipulation or guilt trip she was planning to deploy. The voicemail notification appeared moments later. Something made me listen to it right away, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a sense that I needed to know what was coming. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. What I heard made my blood run cold. "Amber." My mother's voice was shaking, but not with sadness, with rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. "If you don't drop this ridiculous lawsuit, I will make sure everyone in this town knows what kind of person you really are. I will tell everyone the truth about you, that you're selfish, that you're ungrateful, that you abandoned your sick mother for years and only came back to flaunt your money and destroy your family." Her voice was getting louder, more unhinged. "I'll tell them what a terrible daughter you've always been. I'll make sure everyone knows you're using your child as a weapon against your own family. I'll tell them you're mentally unstable, that you've always been dramatic and manipulative. I'll destroy whatever reputation you think you've built in this town. By the time I'm done, no one will want to do business with you. No one will trust you." I could hear her breathing heavily, working herself into a frenzy. "You think you're so smart with your lawyers and your money. You think you can threaten me. I'm your mother. You owe me everything. I raised you. I fed you. I gave you a home, and this is how you repay me, by trying to send me to jail." Then came the line that I knew my attorney would call consciousness of guilt. "Over some paperwork from years ago, over money I spent on this family. You benefited from that money too, whether you want to admit it or not. And now you're going to destroy me over it." Her voice dropped to something venomous and cruel. "You were always a mistake, Amber. Always. From the day you were born, you were difficult and demanding and never satisfied with anything. And now you're proving exactly what I always knew about you. You're heartless. You're willing to destroy your own mother to make yourself feel important." The voicemail went on for another minute more. Threats, more accusations, more attempts to guilt and intimidate me. When it finally ended, I sat in the dark for a long moment, listening to Lily's soft breathing beside me. Then I forwarded the voicemail to Richard Thornton with a single line, "Received this tonight." He called me at 7:30 the next morning. "I've listened to the voicemail 3 times, he said without preamble. "This is a gift to our case, though I'm sorry you had to receive it. This is textbook harassment and intimidation. More importantly, since she's specifically threatening to destroy your reputation if you don't drop the legal claim, this constitutes witness tampering. She's trying to coerce you into abandoning a legitimate legal action through threats. What does that mean practically? It means we can request a restraining order if you want one. It means this voicemail becomes evidence not just of her bad character, but of consciousness of guilt. Innocent people don't threaten witnesses and victims. People who believe they did nothing wrong don't try to intimidate their accusers into silence." He paused. "It also means I'm sending her a much stronger letter today. She needs to understand that she's now facing potential additional criminal charges for witness intimidation." The letter that went out via certified mail that afternoon was shorter and sharper than the first demand. "Your voicemail to my client dated March 10th has been preserved as evidence. The content constitutes harassment, intimidation, and witness tampering. Any further direct or indirect contact with my client will result in immediate application for a restraining order and additional criminal complaints. You now have 14 days to pay the demanded sum of $187,400. Failure to comply will result in 1. Civil lawsuit seeking the above amount plus additional damages, court costs, and attorney fees. 2. Report to Connecticut State's Attorney's Office regarding inheritance fraud. 3. Report to IRS regarding unreported income. 4. Criminal complaint regarding witness intimidation based on your March 10th voicemail. Your threats have been documented and will be used as evidence of your state of mind and consciousness of guilt. You are strongly advised to cease all contact with my client and consult with legal counsel immediately. According to Aunt Helen, who'd maintained her role as my informant inside the family, the letter hit my mother like a physical blow. She'd been expecting to intimidate me into backing down. It had always worked before. Instead, her threat had given me more ammunition. Helen told me my mother spent that entire evening trying to call relatives for support, trying to rally family members to pressure me on her behalf. But no one wanted to get involved. They'd all seen the viral video. They'd heard about the inheritance fraud. They knew about Emily's failed Facebook post. And they'd watched my mother's reputation disintegrate in real time. Uncle Bill told her he couldn't help. Aunt Margaret said gently that Mom had made her own bed. Cousin Robert didn't return her calls at all. The family members who might have once jumped to support her now maintained careful distance. They didn't want to be associated with her toxicity, and they certainly didn't want to risk being pulled into a legal battle. My mother was discovering what I'd known my entire life: isolation is crushing. The difference was that my isolation had been imposed on me unjustly. Hers was the natural consequence of her own cruelty finally catching up with her. She sat in that house with Emily, two women who'd spent decades building their self-worth on my diminishment, and confronted the reality that they'd lost everything. Social standing gone, family support evaporated, financial security crumbling, and me, I was completely beyond their reach. Every tool they'd ever used to control me had been stripped away. They couldn't guilt me. I'd learned I had nothing to feel guilty for. They couldn't manipulate me. I could see the tactics clearly now. They couldn't intimidate me. The law was on my side. They couldn't turn others against me. The community had already chosen sides. The empire of control they'd built on decades of gaslighting and cruelty had collapsed completely, leaving them with nothing but each other and the consequences of their actions. But Emily was about to make one final, unforgivable mistake. I was in a client meeting when my phone vibrated with a call from Lily's school. I almost ignored it. The meeting was important, but something made me glance at the screen. When I saw Oakwood Elementary, I excused myself immediately and answered. Ms. Lane, this is Principal Davidson. Lily is fine, but we've had an incident and we need you to come to the school right away. My heart dropped. What kind of incident? Your sister Emily showed up during recess and attempted to make contact with Lily through the playground fence. When staff intervened, she became confrontational. Security is handling it now, but we need you here. I was in my car before he finished the sentence, driving the 12-minute route to the school in 8. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Emily had gone to Lily's school, had approached my 8-year-old daughter, had deliberately sought her out to use her, manipulate her, traumatize her further. When I arrived, I found Principal Davidson waiting for me at the front entrance. Where is she? I demanded. Lily is in my office with the school counselor. She's okay, just confused and a bit shaken. Emily is still in the parking lot with our security officer. She's refusing to leave campus grounds. He walked me through what had happened while we headed toward his office. During afternoon recess, a playground supervisor had noticed an adult woman at the fence line calling to students. When the supervisor approached, she found Emily talking to Lily through the fence. According to witness statements, Emily had said things like, "I need you to tell your mother to stop being mean to Grandma and me," and "Your mother is lying about us. She's hurting our family." The supervisor had immediately intervened, asking Emily to identify herself and explain why she was talking to a student. Emily had responded, "That's my niece. I have a right to talk to her." When informed that she needed to go through the office for any student contact, Emily had become agitated, raising her voice about family rights and just trying to talk to my own niece. The playground supervisor had called for backup, and the assistant principal had come out to handle the situation. Emily had refused to leave, continuing to call out to Lily across the playground. "Your mother is destroying this family. You need to tell her to stop." Security had finally escorted Emily to the parking lot, but she was still there pacing and yelling about her rights. I reached Principal Davidson's office and found Lily sitting in a large chair looking small and frightened. The school counselor sat nearby. The moment Lily saw me, she burst into tears and ran into my arms. "I didn't know what to do," she sobbed into my shoulder. "Aunt Emily kept saying you were being mean, but I know you're not mean, but she was so angry, Mom, and she wouldn't stop talking even when the teacher told her to go away." "Shh, baby, you didn't do anything wrong." I held her tight, rage building in my chest like a wildfire. "You did exactly right by telling a teacher. I'm so proud of you." Principal Davidson showed me the security footage from the playground cameras. I watched Emily approach the fence, watched her motion Lily over, watched my daughter's confusion as her aunt spoke urgently through the chain link. I watched the supervisor intervene and Emily's aggressive response, the raised voice, the pointed finger, the refusal to comply with staff instructions. "We've filed an incident report," the principal said. "This violated multiple school safety protocols. I'm recommending you add Emily to Lily's unauthorized contact list immediately, which will legally prohibit her from any contact with Lily on school grounds. I'm also advising you to consider additional protective measures. This behavior suggests escalating instability." Through the window, I could see Emily still in the parking lot now, sitting on the hood of her car, her face in her hands. Security was standing nearby, clearly waiting for me to decide what happened next. Something crystallized in that moment. This wasn't about hurt feelings or family drama anymore. This was about a woman so desperate and unhinged that she'd stalked my child at her school, had tried to use an 8-year-old as a weapon in her fight against me, had violated every boundary of decency and safety. Emily had proven she would do anything, hurt anyone, cross any line to save herself, including traumatizing my daughter. Again. I pulled out my phone and called Richard Thornton. "Emily just showed up at Lily's school and tried to use my daughter to pressure me. It's all on security footage. The school has filed an incident report. I need legal protection for Lily, and I need it now." "I'll have restraining order paperwork ready by morning," he said immediately. "Can you get me copies of the security footage and the incident report?" "Yes." "Then we're filing for an emergency restraining order tomorrow. Between the Christmas party video, the school incident, and the pattern of harassment, we have more than enough for a judge to grant protection." I thanked him and hung up. Principal Davidson had already prepared copies of everything I needed: incident report, witness statements from 3 staff members, security footage on a USB drive. "What do you want to do about Emily?" he asked, gesturing toward the parking lot. "She's technically trespassing at this point. We can call the police if you want." I looked out the window at my sister sitting on her car hood in defeat. 6 months ago, I might have felt pity. Now I felt nothing but cold determination. "Call the police," I said. "I want a trespassing report filed. I want a paper trail documenting that she came to my daughter's school and refused to leave when told." The police arrived 10 minutes later. I watched from the principal's office as they spoke with Emily, as she gestured frantically as they eventually wrote up a report and sent her on her way with a warning. By the time I buckled Lily into my car to take her home, I'd made several decisions. I'd contact the attorney first thing in the morning. I'd file for the restraining order. I'd use every legal tool available to ensure Emily never got near my daughter again. This was the line, the uncrossable line. Emily had made her choice when she approached my child. Now I'd make mine. And once she made that call, there was no going back. The morning after Emily's school incident, I was in Richard Thornton's office by 9 a.m. with all the documentation Principal Davidson had provided. Richard had already begun drafting the restraining order petition when I arrived. "We're filing for an emergency temporary restraining order," he explained, spreading papers across his conference table. "We'll name both Emily and your mother as respondents with Lily as the protected party. The evidence package is comprehensive enough that I'm confident we'll get the temporary order granted today." I watched him assemble the petition. Every piece of evidence told a story of escalating harm: the Christmas party video with its crystal clear audio of my mother telling Lily she wasn't a real grandchild. The school security footage showing Emily's aggressive behavior and refusal to leave when instructed by staff. Witness statements from 3 school employees describing Emily's agitation and Lily's visible distress. The incident report documenting the trespassing. My mother's threatening voicemail, which Richard noted, showed hostility toward the mother that creates a risk environment for the minor child. He'd also included a letter from Lily's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who'd written without my asking, "Lily Lane has shown marked anxiety when discussing her grandmother and aunt. Following the December incident, she required counseling support. The recent school confrontation caused her to have a panic attack during class the next day. In my professional opinion, as an educator of 15 years, continued contact with these family members poses a genuine threat to this child's emotional well-being. The judge is going to see a clear pattern," Richard said. "Deliberate emotional abuse escalating harassment, unwillingness to respect boundaries, and behavior that frightens a child. This isn't a difficult case. The difficult part will be your mother and sister living with the consequences." We filed the petition at the courthouse at 10:30 a.m. By 2:00 p.m., Judge Catherine Morrison had reviewed the evidence and signed the emergency temporary restraining order. The order prohibited both my mother and Emily from coming within 100 yards of Lily, from contacting her directly or indirectly, from coming to her school, or any location where she regularly spent time. The order was effective immediately and would last for 14 days, at which point a formal hearing would be held to determine if a long-term restraining order should be issued. Richard arranged for a process server to deliver the court papers. At 4:15 p.m., the server found both women at my mother's house. Emily had apparently been living there since Marcus kicked her out. According to the server's report, my mother answered the door, read the papers, and went so pale he'd been concerned she might faint. Emily had appeared behind her, grabbed the papers, and started screaming about how this was illegal, how I couldn't do this, how they'd fight it. The server had calmly informed them that the order was already in effect and that any violation would result in immediate arrest. Then he'd left them standing in the doorway holding papers that legally severed them from my daughter's life. I felt no satisfaction in this, no triumph, just a grim relief that Lily was finally legally protected. The 2 weeks between the temporary order and the formal hearing passed quietly. My mother tried calling me 6 times in direct violation of the provision that prohibited indirect contact through me to reach Lily. I didn't answer, but I saved the call logs as evidence. Emily sent a letter to my house that Richard immediately flagged as a potential violation. It was addressed to me but asked me to please let Lily know her aunt loves her, which constituted attempted indirect contact with the child. When the hearing date arrived, I dressed Lily in her favorite purple dress and explained what was going to happen. "We're going to see a judge. She's like a wise, fair referee who makes sure people follow rules that keep kids safe. She's going to decide that Grandma and Aunt Emily need to stay away from you for a while because they weren't being kind or safe." "Forever?" Lily asked quietly. "For at least 3 years, maybe longer." I knelt down to her eye level. "I know they're family, but family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who treats you with love and respect. And they haven't done that." "I know," she said, and the sadness in her voice broke my heart. "I just wish they had been nicer." "Me too, baby. Me too." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, formal, but not intimidating. Judge Morrison was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and sharp, kind eyes. My mother and Emily sat on one side with no attorney. According to Richard's sources, they'd consulted with 3 different lawyers, all of whom had declined to take the case after reviewing the evidence. The hearing began with Richard presenting our case. He played the Christmas party video on the courtroom screen. Watching it again in that formal setting with a judge taking notes made the cruelty even more stark. You could hear my mother's deliberate emphasis on real grandchildren. You could see Lily's face crumple. There was no context that made it acceptable. Richard then showed the school security footage. Emily approaching the fence, Lily's hesitant approach, the supervisor's intervention, Emily's aggressive refusal to leave, her shouting at Lily across the playground. He presented the threatening voicemail, Mrs. Patterson's letter statements from the school staff, and a brief psychological evaluation from the counselor Lily had been seeing since December. When he finished, Judge Morrison looked at my mother and Emily. "Do either of you have representation?" "We can't afford a lawyer," my mother said, her voice thin. "My daughter has more money than we do. This isn't fair." "The ability to afford representation doesn't determine the validity of a restraining order," the judge said calmly. "Would either of you like to respond to the evidence presented?" Emily spoke first, her voice defensive and shaky. "I was just trying to talk to my niece. I just wanted her to understand that her mother is lying about us, that we're not bad people. I have a right to have a relationship with her." Judge Morrison's expression didn't change. "You went to her school without permission, ignored instructions from multiple school staff members to leave, and had to be escorted off property by security while shouting at a child who witnesses described as visibly frightened. That is not acceptable family contact, Ms. Chen. That is harassment of a minor." Emily opened her mouth to argue, but the judge continued. "Furthermore, the school incident occurred in the context of an ongoing pattern of behavior." She gestured at the evidence. "A pattern that includes the deliberate public humiliation of this child at a family event." My mother tried next. "Your Honor, we love our granddaughter. This is a family misunderstanding that's gotten out of hand. Amber is keeping us from our own family over something minor. Did you or did you not tell this 8-year-old child that she was not your real grandchild?" the judge interrupted. The courtroom went silent. My mother's mouth opened and closed. It came out wrong. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "We have video evidence with clear audio, Ms. Morrison. You not only said those words, you said them loudly enough for multiple adults to hear, and you followed them by deliberately giving treats to other children while excluding this one. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was calculated cruelty directed at a child." Judge Morrison looked down at her notes. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented. I've read the statements from school personnel, from the child's teacher, from the counselor. I've watched both videos multiple times. What I see is a clear pattern of emotional abuse and harassment directed at a vulnerable child." She looked up at my mother and Emily. "This court's primary concern is the well-being of the minor child involved. Based on the evidence, I find that there is a credible threat to the emotional and psychological safety of Lily Lane if contact with the respondents continues." Judge Morrison signed the document in front of her. "I'm issuing a 3-year restraining order prohibiting both respondents from any contact, direct or indirect, with the minor child Lily Lane. You are prohibited from coming within 100 yards of her person, her home, her school, or any location she regularly frequents. You are prohibited from any form of contact, including, but not limited to, in-person contact, phone calls, text messages, emails, social media, contact through third parties. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and potential criminal charges." She looked at both women sternly. "I want to be very clear, this is not about family disagreements or misunderstandings. This is about protecting a child from documented emotional abuse. If you care about this child at all, you will respect these boundaries and use this time to reflect on your behavior." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed in the small courtroom. We left through a side exit to avoid any confrontation. In the parking lot, Richard shook my hand. "That was one of the clearest rulings I've seen in these cases." Judge Morrison didn't hesitate for a second. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "You did the right thing," he replied. "Some bridges need to burn to keep the people you love safe." Word of the restraining order spread through our small community within days. I half expected backlash, people saying I'd gone too far, that you can't turn your back on family no matter what. But that's not what happened. Instead, I received messages of support. A mother from Lily's class texted, "I heard about the restraining order. Good for you. I would have done the same thing to protect my daughter." Another parent stopped me at the grocery store. "My mother-in-law is emotionally abusive to my son. I've been too afraid to cut her off because family is family. You've given me the courage to do what I should have done years ago." The local parenting Facebook group had a discussion thread about it. Someone had posted asking for advice about toxic grandparents, and multiple people referenced my situation as an example of appropriate protective action. There was that case recently where a mother got a restraining order against her own mother and sister for abusing her daughter, someone wrote. That's what protecting your child looks like. Family doesn't get a free pass to hurt kids. My mother and Emily, meanwhile, sank deeper into social isolation. According to Aunt Helen, they'd stopped going to church because the whispers and avoidance were too painful. Former friends no longer called. Neighbors who'd once been friendly now offered only cold nods. The restraining order had served as a public declaration that their behavior wasn't just inappropriate, it was serious enough to require legal intervention. They weren't just people who'd been mean at a family party anymore. They were people so toxic, so dangerous to a child's well-being that a judge had legally barred them from contact. That stigma followed them everywhere in our small town. But Amber still had one more thing she needed to do. 6 months had passed since that Christmas party. 6 months since everything changed. Spring was transitioning into early summer, and Lily and I had settled into a peaceful routine, unburdened by toxic obligations or dreaded family events. She was thriving in therapy, sleeping through the night, laughing more freely. The restraining order had given us more than legal protection. It had given us permission to build a life defined by peace instead of managing dysfunction. Then, on a Tuesday evening in late June, my phone rang. I was making dinner while Lily did homework at the kitchen table. When I saw my mother's number on the screen, my first instinct was to ignore it. She'd violated the restraining order's indirect contact provisions enough times that I'd simply stopped engaging. But something made me answer this time. Maybe intuition. Maybe curiosity about what new manipulation she'd attempt. Hello. The voice that came through was one I'd never heard before from my mother. Thin, trembling, stripped of all the authority and command that had defined her my entire life. Amber, it's Mom. A long pause filled with the sound of difficult breathing. I need to ask you something. I waited, saying nothing. I'm sick, she continued, and now I could hear genuine fear beneath the words. The diabetes has gotten worse. The doctor says my levels are dangerous. I need insulin and other medications, but I can't afford them this month. Another pause, longer this time. The house is being sold. The court said we have to be out by the end of July. Emily and I barely have enough for food. We're behind on the utilities. They're threatening to shut off the power. And my medications. They cost $400, sometimes $500 a month after Medicare. I don't have it. The silence stretched between us. I heard her swallow hard before continuing. I'm asking if you could help with the medical expenses. Just the medications. I need them to live, Amber. Please. That word, please, sounded so foreign coming from her mouth. In 42 years, I couldn't remember her ever saying it to me with genuine humility. There was no manipulation in her voice, no guilt-tripping, no veiled threats. Just naked, desperate need. I let the silence extend another few beats, watching Lily carefully write spelling words at the table, oblivious to the magnitude of this moment. You had $50,000 of my inheritance, I said finally, my voice calm and level. Money that grandmother left specifically to me because she witnessed how you treated me. She wanted me to have security, to have something you couldn't take away. But you took it anyway. Amber. You had 10 years to use that money. I continued, not raising my voice, not getting emotional. 10 years. You sold grandmother's house for over $200,000, money that should have been mine. Where did it go? Mom? Did you spend it on yourself, on maintaining appearances, on Emily's wedding and her kids' daycare when she couldn't afford it? The silence on the other end told me I'd hit the mark. You didn't just take money from me, I said. You took my childhood. You took every moment I should have felt valued and turned it into evidence that I was worthless. You dismissed every achievement, forgot every birthday that mattered, and made sure I understood that I would never, ever be good enough. You took my confidence, my sense of self-worth, my belief that I deserved to be loved. I heard a sound that might have been a sob, but I didn't stop. And when I built a life anyway, when I succeeded despite everything you did to keep me down, you tried to take that too. You tried to take my daughter's sense of belonging. You looked an 8-year-old child in the eyes and told her she wasn't real enough, wasn't worthy enough to be considered your actual grandchild. You tried to destroy her the same way you destroyed me. "I'm sorry," my mother whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Are you," I asked, "are you sorry for what you did? Or are you sorry that you're facing consequences?" She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because we both knew the truth. "You spent decades making me feel like I owed you everything," I said. "You acted like my existence was a burden you generously agreed to bear. You treated me like I should be grateful for the bare minimum of what a parent owes a child. And now you're calling me because you need help, and I'm the only one with resources to provide it." The irony of this moment was almost too perfect. The daughter she'd dismissed as worthless was now her only lifeline. The child she'd starved of love and validation was the only one capable of saving her. "The diabetes medication," she said again, and now she was openly crying. "I need it, Amber. Without it, I could go into diabetic shock. I'm scared." I closed my eyes and thought about all those years, the forgotten birthdays, the destroyed college application, the science fair my parents missed, the countless dinners I'd cooked without thanks, the inheritance she'd stolen while actively working to keep me downtrodden so I'd never discover the theft. I thought about Lily at that Christmas party reaching for a cookie with innocent hope only to be told she wasn't real enough to deserve it. I thought about the woman on the other end of this phone call who'd had 40 years to choose differently and had chosen cruelty every single time. Mother begged, but Amber had already decided. The pause stretched long enough that I heard my mother's breathing hitch with fear that I'd simply hang up. I looked at Lily absorbed in her homework, safe and happy in our quiet kitchen. I thought about the woman I wanted to be, not for my mother's sake, but for my own. For my daughter's. "I'm not going to let you die or suffer without medication," I said finally. I heard her sharp intake of breath, the beginning of relief. "But I need you to understand something clearly," I continued before she could speak. "I'm not doing this because you deserve it. You don't. I'm not doing it because you've earned my compassion through remorse or change. You haven't. I'm doing this because I'm choosing to be the person you never were, someone who doesn't use another person's desperation as a weapon, even when they would have used mine. Amber, I'm not finished." My voice remained calm but firm. "Here's how this will work. I'll arrange for your medication costs to be paid directly to the pharmacy each month. The payments will go through my attorney's trust account. You'll never see the money, never touch it. This covers medical necessities only. Insulin, diabetes medications necessary, doctor visits, nothing else. Not utilities, not food, not Emily's expenses. Just what you need to stay alive." I could hear her trying to process this, trying to figure out if there was room to negotiate for more. "If you try to manipulate this arrangement in any way, if you try to get additional money, if you contact me outside of medical emergencies, if you attempt to use this as leverage to gain access to Lily, it ends immediately. I'll stop the payments and you'll be on your own. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "This isn't reconciliation," I said clearly. "This isn't forgiveness. This isn't the first step toward rebuilding a relationship. This is me choosing to keep you alive while maintaining absolute boundaries. You'll survive, but you'll do it without me." I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Lily and I had planted together last month. "I'm doing this for one more reason," I continued. "My daughter is learning how to be a human being by watching me. Every choice I make teaches her something about how to navigate the world, how to treat people, how to protect herself while remaining herself. I want Lily to understand something crucial, I said. I want her to know that being a good person doesn't mean letting people abuse you. It doesn't mean accepting cruelty because someone is family. It means maintaining your boundaries fiercely while not becoming what hurt you. You treated me with cruelty for 40 years. I'm choosing not to reflect that cruelty back, even when I have every right to. My mother was crying openly now, but I continued anyway. You see, Mom, what you never understood is that real strength isn't about dominating other people. It's not about making yourself feel big by making others feel small. Real strength is being able to protect yourself and still act according to your own values. It's saying no without becoming the thing you're saying no to. I turned away from the window and looked at Lily again, this precious child who would never doubt her worth the way I had doubted mine. I'm teaching my daughter that she can stand up for herself and still be kind, that she can refuse to accept mistreatment without turning cruel herself, that she can say, "This ends here," without losing her humanity in the process. That's a lesson you never learned, and it's the reason you're alone right now. The silence on the other end was broken only by the sound of my mother's quiet sobbing. But understand this completely, I said, my voice steady and final. Lily and I will never come back. You'll never have access to us, never be part of our lives, never sit at our table, or celebrate our milestones or know us as people. The restraining order stays in place. You won't meet Lily's future friends or partners. You won't be at her graduation or her wedding someday. You won't know your great-grandchildren if she has them. I let that sink in for a moment, the full weight of what she'd lost. I'll keep you alive, I said quietly. I'll make sure you have the medicine you need. But you'll live the rest of your days without us. You had 40 years to choose differently. 40 years to see me, to value me, to treat me like I mattered. You chose not to. Every single day you made that choice. And when I finally had a daughter of my own, you tried to do the same thing to her. My voice didn't waver. These are the consequences. This is what happens when you spend decades destroying someone and then expect them to save you anyway. I'm saving you because of who I am, not because of who you are. But I'm doing it from a distance, and that distance will never close. Amber, please. This call is over. I hung up before she could say whatever plea she'd prepared, whatever last attempt at manipulation she thought might work. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there in my kitchen, in the life I'd built, surrounded by the peace I'd created. And something extraordinary happened. I waited for the guilt to come, the crushing familiar weight of feeling like I'd been too harsh, too unforgiving, too unwilling to give family another chance. I waited for the voice in my head that had tortured me for decades, telling me I should have been kinder, more understanding, more willing to accept crumbs of affection. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt clear, powerful, free. I'd drawn a line that protected my daughter while maintaining my own integrity, a line that said, I will not let you suffer needlessly, but I will also not let you hurt us anymore. It was a boundary that required both strength and compassion, and my mother would never understand it because toxic people can't comprehend that combination. To them, compassion is weakness. To them, boundaries are cruelty. They can't fathom that you can be both merciful and firm, both kind and immovable. I'd done something she could never do. I'd broken the cycle without perpetuating it. I'd protected my child without becoming a monster. I'd maintained my values while refusing to be a victim anymore. Lily looked up from her homework. Mom, are you okay? I went to her and kissed the top of her head. I'm perfect, baby. Absolutely perfect. And then the community gave Amber something unexpected. 1 year after that Christmas party, on a cold December evening that felt like both an ending and a beginning, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address was the Connecticut Women's Business Association, and inside was a formal notification that made me read it 3 times to believe it was real. I'd been nominated for the Community Hero Award. The letter explained that the recognition wasn't primarily for my business success, though my companies were mentioned. It was for something else entirely, for demonstrating extraordinary courage in protecting children from family toxicity and inspiring other women in our community to establish healthy boundaries that prioritize their children's well-being over maintaining harmful family dynamics. The nomination had been submitted by 6 different women I knew from various community connections. The letter included excerpts from their statements. Amber Lane's public stand against family abuse gave me the courage to finally protect my daughter from her emotionally abusive grandfather. Watching Amber choose her child over toxic family obligations taught me that saying no to family isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Her story was the catalyst I needed to stop forcing my children into relationships with relatives who hurt them. I sat at my kitchen table reading these words, tears streaming down my face. I'd thought I was just protecting Lily. I hadn't realized I was giving permission to an entire community of mothers and daughters to protect themselves. The ceremony was held at the Riverside Manor, the same venue where I'd held that fateful Christmas party 1 year ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd rented this elegant ballroom to create belonging in a family that rejected me. Now I was returning to be honored by a community that had embraced me. Over 200 people attended. Local business leaders, community members, other award recipients, and several journalists from regional publications. The room looked different than it had that December night. Warmer, somehow filled with people who'd chosen to be here rather than people obligated by blood. When they called my name, I stood and reached for Lily's hand. She was 9 now, taller and more confident than the little girl who'd reached for that cookie a year ago. We walked to the stage together because this award wasn't just mine, it was ours. She was the reason I'd found my voice. She was the person I'd been protecting. She deserved to stand beside me in this moment of recognition. The presenter read a summary of my story, the Christmas party video, the stand I'd taken, the legal boundaries I'd established, the community impact. Then she handed me a crystal award engraved with my name and the words, "For courage in protecting the next generation." I looked out at the audience, at all these faces, some familiar, some strangers, all looking at me with respect and appreciation. For 40 years, I'd been told I didn't matter. Now I stood on a stage being honored for the choice to believe I did. For most of my life, I began my voice steady. I believed family was a fixed obligation, something you endured no matter the cost, no matter the pain, no matter how much it damaged you. I thought that's what loyalty meant, accepting mistreatment because people were related to you by blood. I squeezed Lily's hand. Then I became a mother and everything changed. I realized that family is supposed to be where you're safest, where you're most loved, where you're most valued for exactly who you are. When it's not those things, when it becomes a source of harm, especially to our children, we have the right and the responsibility to walk away. Several women in the audience were nodding, and I saw more than a few reaching for tissues. Lily taught me that protecting her was more important than keeping peace with people who didn't value peace anyway. That standing up for her was more important than maintaining relationships with people who would hurt her. That's not rebellion. That's not cruelty. That's love in its purest form. I looked down at my daughter, who was looking up at me with pride shining in her eyes. And she taught me something else, that breaking cycles of abuse doesn't mean becoming harsh or unforgiving. It means being strong enough to say, "This ends here," while still maintaining your own humanity. We can protect ourselves fiercely and still be kind. We can set boundaries and still be compassionate. We just have to understand that compassion for others can never come at the cost of our children's safety. The applause that followed was thunderous. People rose to their feet, a standing ovation that felt like validation for every hard choice I'd made, every moment of doubt I'd pushed through, every time I'd chosen my daughter over the approval of people who would never approve of me anyway. After the ceremony, I was surrounded by women wanting to share their stories. A grandmother who'd finally stopped forcing her grandchildren to hug relatives who made them uncomfortable. A mother who'd cut off her toxic sister after years of boundary violations. a young woman who'd chosen not to invite her abusive parents to her wedding. Each of them thanked me, told me my story had given them permission to prioritize their children's emotional safety over family obligation. Notably absent from this celebration were my mother and Emily. They hadn't been invited, wouldn't have been welcome, and couldn't have borne to attend anyway. In the year since the Christmas party, their lives had continued their downward spiral. Emily's divorce had finalized 4 months ago. Marcus had been awarded primary custody, the children spent weekdays with him, and only saw Emily every other weekend under supervision requirements after the school incident. She'd moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town, working part-time at a retail store for minimum wage, her social media accounts abandoned after the Facebook disaster. My mother had been forced to sell the family home. The proceeds had gone to settling my inheritance claim. She'd moved into a modest senior living apartment existing on Social Security and the medical payments I made anonymously through Richard's office. According to Helen, she rarely left her apartment, couldn't face the community that had once respected her. They existed in the same town where I was being celebrated, but they might as well have been on different planets. They'd become cautionary tales, the grandmother and aunt who'd abused a child and faced comprehensive consequences. I'd become an example of protective motherhood. The contrast was stark, complete, and entirely of their own making. But Emily was about to experience one more devastating loss. 5 years passed. 5 years of peace, growth, and healing. Lily was 12 now, thriving in middle school, confident in ways I'd never been at her age. She knew her worth instinctively because no one had ever taught her to doubt it. She had friends who valued her, teachers who saw her potential, and a mother who would walk through fire to protect her. We'd built a good life, a real life, one defined by what we created together rather than what we'd escaped from. On a Saturday afternoon in early December, 5 years almost to the day since that Christmas party, Lily and I were grocery shopping. We were in the produce section debating between red and green grapes when Lily suddenly went still. "Mom," she said quietly, her hand touching my arm. Is that Grandma?" I looked up and saw her. My mother, but she'd transformed into someone I barely recognized. She'd always been a formidable presence, tall, commanding, someone who filled a room with her personality. Now she was shrunken, elderly, in a way that went beyond years. She moved slowly, carefully pushing a cart that held maybe 6 items. She was alone. My first instinct was to turn away to leave through another aisle before she saw us. 5 years of peace had been precious. I didn't want to disrupt it with even a brief encounter. But Lily was looking at me with curious, thoughtful eyes. Not fear, the therapy and the distance had healed that. Just curiosity about this woman who was her grandmother by blood, but a stranger in every way that mattered. I made a decision. We would face this. Not because my mother deserved closure, but because running from her would give her power she no longer held over us. "Come on," I said to Lily, taking her hand. We walked toward the produce section where my mother was examining tomatoes with the careful attention of someone counting every penny. She must have sensed our approach because she looked up. The expressions that crossed her face happened in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, shock, shame, desperate hope, and finally resignation. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tomato in her hand trembled slightly. "Are you well?" I asked. My voice was neither warm nor cold. It was simply a question, an inquiry about survival, not an opening for relationship. She nodded shakily, and immediately tears began streaming down her weathered face. "Amber," she whispered. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. About everything. I raised a gentle hand, stopping her. "I know. I've known for a long time." She stood there crying silently in the grocery store produce section, this woman who'd spent decades making me feel worthless, now reduced to tears at the sight of me. I felt no satisfaction in it, no vindication, just a kind of peaceful acceptance. "I don't hate you," I said, and I meant it. I used to think I might someday, that all this pain might turn into hatred. But it didn't. I just don't need you. We've built a life that's healthy and full of actual love. I hope you find peace in your remaining years. I truly do. It wasn't forgiveness. Forgiveness would imply that what she'd done was forgivable and some things simply aren't. But it was release. I was releasing her from any space she still occupied in my heart or mind. She was just a person now. Not my tormentor, not my mother in any meaningful sense. Just a person I once knew who'd made terrible choices. Is she... My mother's voice cracked and she looked at Lily with such naked longing it was almost painful to witness. Is Lily okay? I looked down at my daughter standing beside me, 12 years old, straight-backed and steady, meeting her grandmother's eyes without fear or neediness. She was wearing a hoodie from her robotics club and had a book tucked under her arm because we'd stopped at the bookstore first. She was everything I'd fought to give her safe, valued free. She's more than okay, I said softly. She's loved properly. She knows her worth. She knows that love isn't supposed to hurt that family, isn't supposed to diminish you. She's everything I wasn't allowed to be. My mother let out a sound that was half sob, half acknowledgement. She understood what I was telling her. You missed this. You could have had this and you chose cruelty instead. I took Lily's hand and offered my mother a slight nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not affection. Take care of yourself, I said, and turned to walk away. Thank you, my mother called after us, her voice breaking. For the medications, for keeping me alive. I know it's you. I didn't turn back. I just kept walking, Lily's hand secure in mine. As we loaded groceries into the car, Lily was quiet, thoughtful. Finally, she asked, "Do you feel bad leaving her like that?" I considered the question carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. No, sweetheart. I feel clear. She had every opportunity to love us right, and she chose not to. For 40 years, she chose not to. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be crossed once and then left behind. We crossed that bridge 5 years ago, and we're never going back. Lily nodded, slowly processing this. She looked really sad. She is sad, and that's a natural consequence of her choices. But her sadness isn't our responsibility to fix. We can wish her well from a distance, but we don't have to sacrifice our peace to ease her guilt. I think I understand, Lily said. We're allowed to be happy even if she's not. Exactly, baby. Exactly. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. As I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, I didn't see my mother still standing by her car watching us leave. I didn't see the grocery store or the past it represented. I just saw the road ahead, the one that led to our home, our life, our future. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly, finally free. Because Amber had already found her real family. 10 years. A full decade had passed since that Christmas party that changed everything. I was 50 now, and Lily was 17, a young woman on the cusp of her own independence, preparing for college, radiant, with the confidence that comes from being loved unconditionally your entire life. Our home was nothing like the house I'd grown up in. Here, laughter wasn't undercut by cruelty. Support didn't come with conditions. Love wasn't a transaction where affection had to be earned through perfection or subservience. We had rituals that felt sacred in their simplicity. Sunday morning pancakes where we'd talk about the week ahead. Friday movie nights with popcorn and no phones allowed spontaneous road trips whenever life felt too routine. Every tradition, every habit, every small moment was intentionally built to be the opposite of what I'd experienced as a child. Lily had never once questioned whether she belonged. She'd never wondered if she was worthy. She'd grown up watching me demonstrate that love meant protection, honesty, and respect, and she'd internalized those lessons so deeply that they'd become part of her character. She stood up for friends who were bullied. She called out injustice when she saw it. She knew bone deep that she deserved kindness because I'd made sure of it every single day. I'd also built a chosen family beyond just Lily and me. Close friendships with women who understood boundaries, who celebrated victories without envy, who showed up during struggles without judgment. Sarah, my college roommate who'd been there through everything. Helen until she passed peacefully 2 years ago, leaving me a final note that said simply, "You were always brave. You just needed to know it." My neighbor Patricia, who'd welcomed us with cookies when we first moved in and had become the grandmother figure Lily deserved. These women were my real family, chosen, earned, treasured. The Grace Memorial Scholarship had become my greatest pride beyond Lily. Using the settlement money from my stolen inheritance, I'd created something that turned my pain into power for others. The scholarship wasn't just financial, though we provided full tuition for young women escaping toxic family situations. We also offered therapy resources, mentorship from successful women who'd survived similar circumstances, and a community where survivors could support each other. 47 young women had gone to college on Grace Memorial scholarships over the past decade. Many had returned as volunteers and mentors themselves, creating a self-sustaining network of women lifting each other up. I received letters constantly, some from recipients, some from their mothers, some from siblings who'd watched their sisters break free. "You saved me from believing I deserved the abuse. Your story gave me permission to leave. Because of you, my daughter won't grow up the way I did." My pain hadn't just healed, it had transformed into generational change. One evening, in late November, Lily was working on her college application essays at our kitchen table. The same table where she'd once done elementary school homework, while I fielded that phone call from my mother. She looked up from her laptop with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, I'm writing about defining moments. Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret it?" "What happened? All the pain." I set down the book I'd been reading and considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. She wasn't asking if I regretted cutting off my family. She knew I didn't. She was asking something deeper. Did I regret the suffering itself? The 40 years of being invisible before I found my voice? "I regret the years I wasted trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it," I said slowly. "I regret believing I was the problem when the problem was always them. I regret not protecting myself sooner, not understanding my worth until I had you to fight for." I moved to sit beside her. "But I don't regret leaving, not for a single second, because leaving gave us this home where you've never once felt unwanted. This peace where we both breathe easy. This love that doesn't come with conditions or cruelty." I touched her face gently. "It gave me you healthy and whole. It gave me myself, the version of me that wasn't buried under their expectations and cruelty. So no, sweetheart. I don't regret the outcome. I just wish the path to it had hurt less." Lily leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat like that for a long moment. Finally, she said, "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." Those words settled into my heart like a blessing. The daughter I'd protected, the child I'd fought for, saw me as strong. Not broken, not damaged, not the failure my mother had tried to make me believe I was. Strong. And in that moment, I understood the deepest truth of my entire journey. The best revenge isn't destruction. It isn't about making your abusers suffer or proving them wrong. It's about building a life so beautiful, so full, so genuinely happy that the past can't touch it anymore. I didn't just survive my family's toxicity. I transcended it entirely. I created something they could never destroy, because they were never part of it. The warmth of this home, the confidence in my daughter, the community I'd built, the women I'd helped, none of it had anything to do with them. They'd tried to define me, diminish me, destroy me. Instead, I'd walked away and built a masterpiece from the ruins they left behind. Lily went back to her essay. I went back to my book. And in our peaceful kitchen, in the life we'd created together, I felt something I'd never felt in that other house, that other family, that other life complete. Because the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building a life so beautiful that the past can't touch it anymore. And Amber Lane, she built a masterpiece. That's Amber's story. A woman who spent 40 years being told she wasn't enough, only to discover she was always more than enough. She just needed to stop seeking validation from people who were never going to give it. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect yourself or your children? Do you think Amber made the right choice, or should family always get another chance, no matter what? And here's the big question. If you were in Amber's position when her mother called begging for help, what would you have done? Would you have paid for the medications like Amber did, or would you have said no completely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. If Amber's story moved you, if it made you think differently about family obligations and boundaries, hit that subscribe button. We share stories like this every week. Real-life dramas about people who found the courage to stand up, set boundaries, and rebuild their lives on their own terms. Stories about justice, resilience, and the strength it takes to choose yourself when everyone tells you that's selfish. And if you know someone who needs to hear Amber's story, someone dealing with toxic family, someone who feels guilty for setting boundaries, someone raising children in difficult family situations, share this video with them. Sometimes we need to see someone else's courage before we can find our own. Thank you for listening to Amber's journey. I'll see you in the next story.